After my husband passed away, I got a new job, and every night the same driver would take me home. One night, he drove right past my house and said, "Your neighbor has been watching you. Don't go home tonight, trust me." Before we begin, let me know in the comments where you're watching my story from, so I can see how far it's traveled. My name is Eleanor Vance, and I've spent my entire adult life believing that doing things the right way protects you from disaster. I was a teacher for 40 years, the kind who stays after class to help the kid who doesn't understand subtraction, the kind who keeps extra pencils in her drawer because there's always one who comes without supplies. I married George when I was 23. He was a sales representative for a school supply company and came to sell notebooks to my school. It wasn't a movie-style romance, but it was the kind that works. Respect, routine, Sunday strolls through Lincoln Park, and vacations in Lake Geneva every August. We had a daughter, Natalie, who is now 37 and works at an accounting firm downtown Chicago. She lives in Lincoln Park with her husband and my 2 grandsons and comes to see me on Sundays with Tupperware containers of food that I pretend I need, even though I know how to cook perfectly well. George died 6 months ago. A massive heart attack on a Tuesday morning while he was having breakfast. I was making toast, and when I turned around, he had already slumped in his chair, eyes open, hand on his chest. The paramedics were very kind but useless. They arrived in 12 minutes, and there was nothing to be done. The funeral was simple, at the funeral home in Oak Park, where we've lived since we got married. And when the man from the funeral home handed me the final bill, I froze. The insurance policy George had taken out years ago barely covered half of it. I had to pay the rest with the savings we had set aside to fix the furnace. Natalie offered me money, but I said no. I have my pride. And besides, she has 2 kids with appetites big enough to eat the world. A teacher's pension isn't bad, but it's nothing to write home about either. About $2,500 a month, more or less. We finished paying off the mortgage on the house 3 years ago. So at least I don't have that weight on my shoulders, but the expenses don't stop. Electricity, water, HOA fees, food, medications for blood pressure and cholesterol, the car insurance for a car I barely use but don't dare get rid of just in case. I did the math in an old notebook, and the conclusion was clear. Either I cut expenses until I was living like a cloistered nun, or I found a job. At 63, after 40 years of teaching and believing that retirement was the prize for having done my duty, I told Natalie about the situation, and she looked at me as if I had said I was going to India to find myself. "Mom, I can give you money. You don't have to work." But I didn't want to be a burden. She has enough on her plate. So I started looking. I asked at the school where I used to teach, but there was nothing. I registered on a website that Natalie taught me how to use and sent my resume everywhere. I received 3 responses. One from a telemarketing company, which I rejected because I couldn't see myself selling insurance over the phone. Another as a cleaner in an office building, which I also dismissed because my knees are no longer up for scrubbing floors for hours. And a third from Riverbend Community Hospital. Riverbend Community Hospital is in Naperville, a 20-minute drive from my house or 40 by bus if there's traffic. It's a medium-sized public hospital with that mix of white hallways and the smell of disinfectant that they all have. They needed someone in administration and billing for the evening to night shift. The hours were from 6 p.m. to 11:30 p.m., 3 days a week, Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. It wasn't what I had imagined for my life at this age, but they paid $1,000 a month in cash, which, added to my pension, meant I could live without anxiety. I went to the interview in a white blouse and a navy blue skirt I hadn't worn since the funeral, and the head of administration, a woman named Patricia in her 50s with thick-rimmed glasses and a tired face, hired me on the spot. "I need someone who knows how to add and who won't give me problems," she said. I assured her I knew how to add and that problems weren't my thing. I started work at the beginning of October. The first day, Natalie drove me and explained how everything worked. She introduced me to Patricia and the other 2 girls on the evening shift, Sarah and Lauren, both in their 20s, friendly, but with that superficial friendliness of someone who doesn't have time to really get to know you. My job was to review invoices, enter data into the computer, and answer calls from patients who wanted to know how much they owed or to dispute errors in their bills. It wasn't complicated, but it was monotonous, and the hours passed as slowly as snails. At 11:30, a bell would ring. The girls would pack their things in 2 minutes and run out to catch the bus. I would stay for another 10 minutes organizing papers because I was taught to leave things done right, and then I would go down to the empty lobby where only the night security guard remained, reading the sports section. The first few weeks I took the bus home. The stop is right in front of the hospital, and the bus dropped me off 3 blocks from my house. The ride lasted half an hour, and I used the time to look out the window and think about nothing, which is my favorite way of thinking. But at the end of October, there were cuts in public transportation, the kind they announce on the news that nobody cares about until it affects you. The last bus, which used to leave at 11:30 p.m., now left at 11. I couldn't leave work half an hour early. They wouldn't allow it, and besides, I needed the full pay. Patricia suggested I find a rideshare. It's what everyone does now, Eleanor. It's safe and cheaper than a taxi. I didn't even know what a rideshare was. Natalie installed the app on my phone one Sunday afternoon, while her sons watched cartoons in my living room and her husband dozed on the sofa. She showed me how to request a ride, how to pay, how to check drivers' ratings. Mom, you only take rides from drivers with good ratings, and if you ever feel weird or uncomfortable, you cancel and request another one, okay? I nodded, but inside I thought this whole thing of getting into strangers' cars was a modern madness that would have been unthinkable in my day. But well, times change, and old folks like me have to change with them or get left behind. The first night I used the app was a Tuesday in early November. It was that dry Chicago cold that stings your face. I left the hospital at 11:35 p.m. I crossed the lobby where the guard wished me a good night without looking up from his paper and went out to the parking lot. It was dark and almost empty. Only 4 or 5 cars belonging to night shift workers remained. With trembling hands, I took out my phone, opened the app, and requested a ride. A gray Toyota appeared on the screen, arriving in 3 minutes. The driver's name was Arthur Sellers, and he had a 5-star rating. That calmed me down a bit. I waited by the hospital door under a streetlight that flickered as if it were cold too. The Toyota arrived on time. It was an older model but clean, the kind you can tell the owner takes care of even though it's old. It stopped in front of me, and the driver rolled down the window. "Eleanor?" he asked. I nodded and walked closer. The man was in his late 50s, graying hair in a buzz cut, 3-day stubble, tired but kind eyes. He wore a brown leather jacket and smelled of tobacco and car air freshener. "Get in, it's cold," he said. I hesitated for a second. The parking lot was dark. It was almost midnight, and I was an older woman getting into a stranger's car. But Natalie had told me it was safe, that millions of people did it every day, and besides, I didn't have many options. So I opened the back door and got in. "Sit up front if you want. I don't bite," he said with a half smile. I shook my head and buckled my seatbelt in the back. He started the car, and we left the parking lot. For the first few minutes, we didn't speak. I looked out the window at the empty streets of Naperville, the orange streetlights, the few cars on the road at that hour. He drove slowly, carefully, using his turn signal at every turn. Soft music played on the radio, something instrumental that I didn't recognize. After a while, he broke the silence. "Getting off work late?" he asked without taking his eyes off the road. I told him yes, that I worked at the hospital until 11:30. "Tough shift," he commented. "And you do this every night?" I asked him. "Every night I can," he replied. "Closed my shop 2 years ago, and now this is what I've got." I don't know why, but that phrase hit me. Closed my shop. 4 words that contained an entire life, a broken dream, a man who had had something of his own and had lost it. Just like I had lost George, just like I had lost the peace of retirement, just like I was losing the dignity of not having to work at my age. I looked at him in the rearview mirror and saw his jaw was tense, as if talking about it was difficult. I didn't press him. The rest of the ride passed in silence. When we reached my street, in front of my 2-story house with the beige facade and the green shutters that hadn't been painted in years, he stopped the car and turned to me. "Have a good rest, ma'am," he said. I thanked him, paid through the app, and got out. I watched the Toyota drive down the street and disappear around a corner. I didn't think about him again until 2 nights later. On Thursday, I requested a ride again when I left the hospital. This time, the same gray Toyota appeared. Arthur Sellers, 5 stars. When I saw him pull up in front of me, I thought it was a coincidence. Chicago is big, but maybe not that big for night drivers. I got into the car, this time directly into the front seat, because it seemed ridiculous to keep riding in the back like an aristocrat. He greeted me with a nod and started the car. "Another long night?" he asked. "Another one," I replied. And again we spoke little, just loose comments about the biting cold, about how empty the streets were, about how quickly November had passed. When he dropped me off at my door, I thanked him, and he said, "Until next time," as if he already assumed there would be a next time, and there was. On Saturday, the following Tuesday, Thursday again. Always the same gray Toyota, always Arthur Sellers. At first I thought it was pure coincidence, that maybe he worked in that area and it was profitable for him to accept rides from the hospital. But after the fourth or fifth time, I started to suspect it wasn't chance. The app assigns you the nearest available driver. But how was it possible that he was always near the hospital right at 11:30 at night? One night, I asked him, "Arthur, do you always position yourself around here at this time?" He took a while to answer, kept his eyes on the road, his hands firm on the steering wheel, and finally said, "This route works for me." The answer didn't convince me, but I didn't insist. By then, I had gotten used to him. It was like having a personal driver without having one. Our conversations grew longer. He told me things about his life in small doses, like someone letting go of baggage bit by bit to keep from sinking. He told me about his auto repair shop, which he had inherited from his father, and which did well for years, until the recession wiped it all out. He told me about the debts, about the banks that don't forgive, about sleepless nights counting unpaid bills. He told me about his wife, who left because she couldn't take the pressure anymore. Because love wears out when there's no money to pay the electricity bill. "I don't blame her," he told me one night. "I wouldn't be able to live with me either." I didn't know what to say. I glanced at him and saw his eyes were shiny, as if he was about to cry but was holding it back. I touched his arm, just that, a small gesture that meant nothing and everything. He didn't say anything, but he nodded slightly as if thanking me. I started telling him things too. I told him about George, about how he died without warning, about how I became a widow overnight, not knowing what to do with the rest of my life. I told him about Natalie, my grandsons, about how lonely I felt in that house that used to be full of noise and now only held silence. I told him about my job at the hospital, about how absurd it felt to be reviewing invoices at my age until midnight. He listened without interrupting, nodding from time to time, and at the end, he would always say something simple but accurate. "It's tough to start from scratch when you think you've already reached the finish line," he told me one night. And he was right. Little by little, those 12-minute rides became the best part of my nights. I'd leave the hospital tired, my back aching from sitting for so many hours and my eyes dry from staring at the computer screen. But as soon as I saw the gray Toyota waiting for me in front of the door, something inside me would relax. I knew I would have those 12 minutes of quiet conversation, of undemanding company, of shared silence when there was nothing to say. I started bringing him coffee from the hospital. At first, I did it as a gesture of gratitude, nothing more. A plastic cup of machine coffee that he received as if it were liquid gold. "You don't have to do that," he would always say. "I know," I'd reply, "but I did it because I wanted to, because I felt like doing that small kindness for someone who had been kind to me without asking for anything in return." One night, he confessed that he had a daughter. Her name was Megan. She was 30 and lived in Denver. They hadn't spoken in over a year. The break was for the same reason his wife had left: money, debts, arguments. Megan got tired of seeing her father broken and decided to distance herself so she wouldn't sink with him. "She sends me texts sometimes," Arthur said. "Photos of my granddaughter. Her name is Claire and she's 2. She's beautiful, but I only know her from pictures." His voice broke a little when he said this. I felt a pang in my chest. I put my hand on his shoulder and said the first thing that came to mind. "They'll come back, Arthur. Babies have a way of stitching things back together. You'll see." I don't know if he believed me, but he nodded and kept driving. I started giving him extra tips. The app already included an automatic tip, but I'd give him more. Bills of $5 or $10 that I'd slip into the glove compartment when he wasn't looking. At first, he protested, saying it wasn't necessary, but I insisted. Just take it and be quiet, I'd say with that authoritarian teacher tone that has never really left me, and he would accept. But not before thanking me with a look that said more than any words. December arrived, and with it, the real cold. The hospital put up garlands in the hallways and a plastic Christmas tree in the lobby that no one looked at. I switched from coffee to hot chocolate because it was freezing cold, and I thought Arthur could use something sweet. The first night I brought it to him, he stared at the cup as if he didn't know what to do with it. Chocolate, I said. I haven't had this since I was a kid. He drank it slowly, in silence, and when he finished, he told me, "My wife used to do these things. Silly little things," she called them. I didn't appreciate them. I didn't know what to say. Sometimes words are unnecessary. One night, I think it was a Thursday in mid-December, Arthur arrived acting different. I noticed it as soon as I got in the car. His hands were tense on the steering wheel, his jaw clenched, his gaze fixed on the rearview mirror, as if he were waiting to see something or someone. He started the car without a word and drove faster than usual. I asked him if he was okay, and he nodded without looking at me. A few minutes of uncomfortable silence passed, the kind that feels heavy, and then suddenly he blurted out, "Eleanor, I need you to answer me honestly." The tone of his voice scared me. It was serious, urgent, like someone who can't wait any longer. "Of course," I said. "What's wrong?" He took a deep breath and asked, "Do you know a neighbor of yours named Ray Collins? He lives 2 streets down from you in a beige house with a white van always parked out front." I was quiet for a moment, trying to place the name. Ray Collins. It didn't ring a bell. Then it hit me. Yes, I knew him by sight. A man in his 40s, dark hair, strong build, always dressed in work clothes. We had nodded at each other a few times when passing on the street, but nothing more. "Yes, I know him to say hello," I said. "Why?" Arthur didn't answer immediately. He kept driving, but instead of turning onto my street, he continued straight. I noticed, and my stomach clenched. "Arthur, you missed my street." He nodded. "I know. We need to talk somewhere quiet." Fear started crawling up my back like a spider. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to stay calm. "Trust me," he said. And even though it sounded like a line from a bad movie, something in his tone made me trust him. He drove to the parking lot of a supermarket that was closed at that hour. He parked in a dark corner, turned off the engine, and turned to me. His face was distraught, his eyes bloodshot as if he hadn't slept in days. "Eleanor, what I'm about to tell you is going to sound crazy, but I need you to listen to the end." I nodded, clutching my purse tightly, ready to run if I had to. But something told me I wouldn't have to. "For several weeks, I've been picking up your neighbor Ray after he leaves the bars," Arthur began. "He's always drunk, always late at night. At first, I didn't think much of it, just another customer. But about 3 weeks ago, on one of those rides, I heard him on the phone. He was so drunk he didn't realize I was listening. He mentioned an address, your address, 17 Elm Street. And he said something that made my blood run cold. He said, 'The old lady on Elm Street is a problem. She sees too much. We have to take care of it before she goes to the police.' I was paralyzed. The words bounced around in my head, unable to find a place to land. The old lady on Elm Street. Me. A problem. Take care of it." "I don't understand," I managed to say. "I haven't seen anything. I don't know what that man is talking about." Arthur held up his hand, asking me to let him continue. Wait, the first time I thought I had misunderstood, that the alcohol had confused me. But I started paying attention. Every time I picked him up, I mentally noted what he said. Dates, times, phrases. I even recorded audio on my phone a couple of times, just in case. And 2 nights ago, he said something that confirmed my suspicions. He mentioned your shifts, Eleanor. He said you work Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays, that you get out at 11:30, that the house is empty. Panic flooded me like ice water. How does he know that? How does he know my shifts? Arthur shook his head. "I don't know, but there's more. Tonight before I picked you up, I drove by your street. I wanted to see if anything was off, and it was. Ray's white van was parked right in front of your house. I saw him get out, walk up to your door, try the knob, peek in the windows. He was checking if anyone was inside. Eleanor, that man is planning to break into your house. I could barely breathe. I felt a tightness in my chest, my hands were trembling, my head felt like it was about to explode. Why? I haven't done anything. I have nothing to do with him. Arthur rubbed his face with his hands, tired. I don't know, but we have to go to the police now. I wanted to protest, to say that maybe it was all a misunderstanding, that maybe Ray had the wrong house, that I didn't want any trouble. But Arthur cut me off. Eleanor, if someone is watching your house, checking your schedule, saying you're a problem that needs to be taken care of, it's not a misunderstanding. It's a threat. And if he's tried to get in once, he'll be back. He was right, I knew it. But accepting it meant admitting that my already complicated life had just turned into a nightmare. I thought about going to a hotel, calling Natalie, hiding until it all blew over. But Arthur insisted. Police. Now. I have the recordings, I have the dates, I have proof. We can't ignore this. I took a deep breath, tried to organize my thoughts, and finally nodded. Okay, let's go. Arthur started the car and drove straight to the nearest police station in downtown Oak Park. It was past midnight, and the building was almost empty. Just a young officer at the front desk who looked at us with surprise when we walked in. Arthur quickly explained the situation, and the officer showed us to a waiting room. After a few minutes, a detective appeared. A woman in her 50s with short hair and rectangular glasses who introduced herself as Detective Miller. She had us come into a small office and asked us to tell her everything from the beginning. Arthur spoke first, taking out his phone and playing the audio he had recorded. Ray Collins's voice sounded slurred, dragged down by alcohol, but the words were clear. The old lady on Elm is a problem, sees too much. Gotta take care of it before she goes to the cops. In another recording, he mentioned my exact address, my work shifts, that the house was empty. In another, he talked about papers, files, getting rid of evidence. I listened, not understanding. What evidence? What had I seen? I couldn't remember anything out of the ordinary. Detective Miller took notes without looking up. When the audio finished, she looked at me intently. Mrs. Vance, you work at Riverbend Community Hospital? Yes, I replied. In administration and billing, evening to night shift. She nodded slowly, as if she were fitting pieces of a puzzle together. Are you aware that Ray Collins works there too? I froze. What? Ray Collins works in night maintenance at Riverbend Community Hospital, the detective repeated. Full night shift, from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. It coincides with your schedule, Mrs. Vance. He's there when you leave. My world came crashing down. Ray worked at my hospital. He was there every night I worked. He saw me leave. He knew my schedule, knew when my house was empty, and he thought I was a problem. Why? The detective must have noticed my confusion because she continued. Have you noticed anything strange at the hospital lately? Anything out of place? Any weird comments? Any situation that caught your attention? I forced myself to think. The past few months had been a monotonous routine of invoices and calls. But then I remembered something. About 3 weeks ago, my boss Patricia had mentioned during a team meeting that they were having problems with physical files disappearing. Patient records that weren't in the archive but were showing up in the system as billed. Patricia attributed it to filing errors, misplaced papers, human mistakes. She said they were going to do a thorough review. I didn't think much of it at the time. Now, I was starting to see the connection. My boss mentioned a few weeks ago that some files were missing, I told the detective. Patient records that weren't in the physical archive but were listed in the system as billed. They were going to do a review. Detective Miller sat up straighter in her chair. And do you participate in those reviews? Not directly, I replied, but I work in billing. I review charges. I have access to the files. If I found something strange, I would report it. The detective exchanged a look with Arthur and then looked back at me. Mrs. Vance, it's possible that Ray Collins is involved in a billing fraud scheme. If he thinks you've seen something or are about to see it, he might try to silence you or retrieve evidence he thinks you have in your house. My stomach churned. Fraud. Silence you. Evidence. words I had only heard on television and were now part of my real life. "But I haven't seen anything," I insisted. "I don't have any proof at my house. I don't know what that man is talking about." The detective nodded. "But he doesn't know that, and that ignorance could be dangerous for you." Arthur, who had been quiet, spoke up. "That's why we have to act now, before he does something." Detective Miller requested a search warrant for Ray Collins's property that same night. While we waited, she offered to let me stay at the station or go to a supervised motel. I didn't want to go to my house, not after knowing someone had tried to get in. Arthur offered to accompany me wherever I went. "I'm not leaving you alone," he said. And even though I barely knew him from a few car rides, I trusted him more than anyone at that moment. The warrant came at 2 a.m. The detective and a team went to Ray's home while I waited at the station with Arthur, drinking bad machine coffee and trying to process everything that was happening. At 4 a.m., the detective returned with a bag full of evidence: medical records, files of elderly patients, lists of fraudulent charges, passwords written on scraps of paper, a phone with conversations confirming the fraud, and something else: a map of Riverbend Community Hospital with night routes marked and the locations of security cameras noted. "You were right," the detective told me. "Ray Collins is involved in a billing fraud scheme targeting elderly patients. He stole records, altered data in the system, billed for treatments that never happened, and he's not alone. He has an outside contact who buys the medical data to use in insurance scams." I was speechless. All this time, while I was innocently reviewing invoices, a criminal enterprise was operating in my own hospital. And I, without knowing it, had become a threat simply by being there, by having access to the right information. Ray Collins was arrested that same morning. The detective explained that Arthur's recordings had been crucial for acting quickly, before Ray could get into my house or harm me. I didn't go back to my house that night. They put me up in a supervised motel until everything was cleared up, until they were sure there were no other accomplices. Arthur stayed with me in the motel lobby until I was assigned a room. Before he left, he gave me a hug, an awkward but sincere hug, and said, "It's over, Eleanor. It's over." I nodded, not entirely convinced. The following days were a whirlwind of statements, interrogations, and legal paperwork. Natalie came from Chicago in a fury, yelling at me for not telling her anything, hugging me tightly, and crying with relief to know I was okay. I told her everything, from the first ride with Arthur to the night at the police station, and she listened with wide, unbelieving eyes. "Mom, something could have happened to you," she kept repeating. And she was right. But it didn't. Thanks to Arthur, it didn't. The Ray Collins case uncovered a much larger investigation. His outside contact turned out to be part of a medical fraud network operating in several Chicago hospitals. They stole data from elderly patients, vulnerable people who didn't check their bills carefully, and used it for phantom charges, fake prescriptions, and fabricated treatments. The hospital had to conduct a full audit, and several people were fired or investigated. I continued to work, though not with the same peace of mind as before. Every shadow in the parking lot made me jump. Every strange noise made me turn around. But slowly, I regained my calm. Arthur and I stayed in touch. He continued to pick me up some nights, even though it wasn't necessary anymore because the hospital adjusted the bus schedule after the scandal. But I liked seeing him, chatting for those 12 minutes, knowing he was okay. And one day, about 3 months after all that, he called me, excited. His daughter Megan had gotten in touch with him. She had read about the case in the newspaper, seen his name mentioned as a key witness, and something inside her had stirred. She wrote to him, apologized for pushing him away, and told him she wanted him to meet Claire, his granddaughter. Arthur told me this with a broken voice and tear-filled eyes. "You were right, Eleanor. Babies have a way of stitching things back together." Megan came from Denver one weekend with Claire. Arthur invited me to meet them, and I accepted. It was strange, I know. An old woman entering the family life of a man I barely knew. But nothing in my life was normal anymore. Megan was a petite woman with dark hair and light eyes, with that mix of toughness and tenderness that young mothers have. Claire was a 2-year-old tornado with messy pigtails and a contagious laugh. We ate at a restaurant near Lincoln Park, and it was strangely comforting, as if we were a family that had been doing this for years. From then on, Sunday dinners became a routine. Natalie and her sons joined sometimes, and what started as a one-time meeting turned into a kind of patched-together family, made of pieces that didn't fit perfectly, but held each other up. Arthur, Megan, Claire, Natalie, my grandsons, and me. An unlikely group brought together by chance, tragedy, and one night in a rideshare that changed everything. I returned to my routine at the hospital. The nights didn't weigh on me as much. I still left at 11:30, but now Sarah and Lauren sometimes waited for me to have a quick drink before we each went home. The night guard learned my name and always wished me a good night with a smile. Patricia gave me a raise as a gesture of gratitude for having been, unknowingly, at the center of a case that cleaned up the hospital's corruption. I didn't feel like a hero, just an old lady who got lucky. One night, well into spring, a new colleague joined the evening shift. Her name was Carol. She had just turned 60, and on her first day, I saw her crying in the bathroom. I went over and asked her what was wrong. Through sobs, she told me she had just been widowed, that she needed to work to make ends meet, that she felt lost and alone. Her words sounded painfully familiar. I dried her tears with a tissue, put a hand on her shoulder, and said, "I've been through this too. You'll get through it too." Then I invited her for a coffee from the machine in the hallway. That bad coffee that nobody likes, but that comforts you simply because someone offers it. As I handed it to her, I thought about everything that had happened since that first ride in Arthur's gray Toyota. I thought about how fragile life is, how a simple gesture can change the course of everything, how kindness can be a lifesaver when you need it most. I thought about George, his funeral, the loneliness of my house, the endless nights reviewing invoices. And I thought about Arthur, his 5-star rating as a perfect driver, his secret recordings, his decision to protect me even though he barely knew me. I thought about Ray Collins and how close I came to disaster. And I thought about this new Carol, crying in a hospital bathroom because life had hit her hard, just like it had hit me. I gave her the coffee and smiled. She thanked me with her eyes and drank slowly, in silence. No more words were needed. Sometimes a small kindness, a bad coffee, a 12-minute conversation in a car can change your destiny when you need it most. And I, Eleanor Vance, retired teacher, widow at 63, night shift hospital worker, had learned that in the most unexpected way possible. The months following Ray Collins' arrest were strange, like living in a parallel version of my own life, where everything seemed the same, but nothing really was. I kept working at the hospital on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. I kept leaving at 11:30 at night. I kept crossing the dark parking lot to the bus stop, where some car would be waiting for me. But I was no longer the same woman who had started that job in October. Now I looked around with different eyes, distrusted shadows, memorized the license plates of white vans, and always kept my phone in my hand with the emergency number a touch away. The fear didn't disappear overnight when they arrested Ray. It remained crouched inside me, like an animal that never fully falls asleep. The hospital made changes after the scandal. Patricia called a meeting with all the administration staff and explained that external auditors would be coming to review every invoice from the last 3 years, that they would implement new security protocols. Sarah and Lauren listened with bored expressions, as if none of it concerned them. But I paid attention to every word because I knew that behind those papers and numbers were real people, vulnerable seniors who trusted the system to work. Patricia looked at me several times during the meeting, as if silently thanking me for having been, unwittingly, the catalyst that uncovered everything. I didn't feel I deserved that gratitude. I had just gone to work, done my job as best I could, and the rest had been pure chance or pure luck or providence. Call it what you will. A week after the meeting, Patricia called me into her office. It was a small cubicle with a window overlooking the parking lot, a desk cluttered with folders, and a framed photo of her 2 grown children. She offered me a seat and closed the door, something she never did. That made me nervous. I thought she was going to fire me, that maybe all this trouble had been too much of a problem, and they preferred to get rid of the old lady who had caused it. But instead she said, "Eleanor, I want to give you a raise." I stared at her, not understanding. "That's not necessary, really," I replied automatically. Because that's the response that always comes out, the one of not wanting to bother, of not asking for anything. But Patricia insisted. Yes, it is necessary. You've been working well. You're one of the few who checks every invoice carefully. And without realizing it, you helped clean this hospital of a rot that had been festering for years. So, I'm giving you an extra $200 a month. It's not negotiable. And she stood up, ending the conversation. I left her office with trembling legs and a strange mix of pride and shame. Pride because someone recognized my work. Shame because I still felt I didn't deserve it. I told Natalie about the raise when she came to see me the following Sunday. She brought the kids, who started running around the yard while her husband, Jason, set up a barbecue that no one had asked for but that he insisted on doing because you have to take advantage of the good weather. Natalie hugged me and told me I deserved it, that I should stop undervaluing myself, that I was a strong and capable woman, even if I didn't see it. Then she dropped the bomb she'd been holding on to. Mom, I've been thinking, you should quit that job. Come live with us or let me help you financially, but don't keep working nights at your age. I looked at her as if she'd suggested I move to Mars. Natalie, I'm not quitting my job. I like working. I like feeling useful, and I'm not going to live with you because I need my space and you need yours. She sighed in defeat and didn't insist further, but I saw in her eyes that maternal worry that never goes away, the one that makes you want to protect your parents when they were always the ones who protected you. Arthur still picked me up some nights, though less and less. The bus had adjusted its schedule again after the scandal and now left at 11:45 p.m., which gave me enough time to catch it without any problem. But on Tuesdays, for some reason neither of us verbalized, I still requested a rideshare, and he still accepted the trip. I think we both needed that continuity, that 12-minute ritual that reminded us we had been through something important together and had come out on the other side. We talked less than before, maybe because we didn't have as much to discover about each other, or maybe because the shared silence no longer needed to be filled with words. Sometimes I'd get in the car, give him the hot chocolate, which had become a tradition, and we'd travel in complete silence to my house. And that was fine. One night in February, Arthur told me that Megan had decided to move back to Chicago. Her relationship in Denver had ended, and she wanted to be closer to her father, to give Claire the chance to really know her grandfather, and not just through video calls. She was looking for a job and an apartment in the area. Arthur told me this with a mix of joy and fear, like someone receiving a gift they're afraid to open in case it turns out to be a lie. What if I mess it up again? He asked me. What if I go back to being the bitter father who only talks about debts and failures? I put my hand on his shoulder, that gesture that had become our secret language, and said, "You won't, because now you know what it feels like to lose them, and that makes you wiser." I don't know if I convinced him, but he nodded and kept driving. Megan arrived in Chicago at the end of February with Claire and 3 suitcases. Arthur had found them a small rental apartment near his in Naperville, a 10-minute walk away. He invited me to see the apartment the day they moved in, which I found strange because I wasn't family, but I went anyway with a houseplant and a bag of cookies for Claire. The apartment was tiny, 500 square feet with 1 bedroom, a living room, a kitchen, and a bathroom. But Megan had decorated it tastefully despite the rush. Colorful curtains, cushions on the sofa, Claire's drawings taped to the fridge. It made the place feel like a home and not just a place to sleep. Megan greeted me with an unexpected hug and thanked me for taking care of her father. "He told me what you did," she said. The hot chocolate, the tips, listening to him. No one had treated him like that in a long time. I didn't know what to say. I had only been kind. Since when did basic kindness deserve so much gratitude? Claire, Arthur's granddaughter, was a 2.5-year-old creature who moved like a whirlwind and spoke in a jumble of real and made-up words. She took my hand as soon as she saw me and dragged me to her room to show me her toys. A stuffed bunny with no ears, a tower of colorful blocks, a storybook with chewed pages. I sat on the floor with her, my knees protesting, and read her the story 3 times in a row because she asked for it every time I finished. Arthur watched us from the doorway with shining eyes, and for a moment, I thought he was going to cry, but he held it in. He coughed to cover it up and went to make coffee. That afternoon, we had coffee and cookies in that tiny apartment while Claire colored on a piece of paper on the floor. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something like family. It wasn't my blood family, but it was family all the same. The weeks passed, and Sunday dinners became sacred. They started with just Arthur, Megan, Claire, and me. But soon, Natalie joined with her sons and Jason. The kids played with Claire while the adults cooked, set the table, and chatted about nonsense. Natalie and Megan got along from the start, maybe because they were both young mothers with complicated lives. Maybe because they shared that perpetual exhaustion of someone raising children without a manual. Jason and Arthur discovered they were both Chicago Bears fans, and that created an instant bond that I didn't understand but respected. And I would sit on the sofa with Claire on my lap and think about how strange it all was, how a rideshare trip had ended up creating this improbable but real family. In March, the trial against Ray Collins and his accomplices began to take shape. Detective Miller called to inform me that I would have to testify as a witness. She explained that my testimony was important because I had been at the center of the scheme without knowing it, because my job in administration gave me a unique perspective on how the fraud worked. I told her I would testify, of course, but the idea of having to face Ray in a courtroom terrified me. Not because I was physically afraid, the police had assured me I would be protected, but because facing someone who had planned to harm you forces you to look your own vulnerability in the face. And that hurts. Arthur had to testify too. He was calmer than I was. He said he just had to tell the truth and play the recordings. Nothing more. But I could tell that underneath that calm, he was nervous. One night, after dropping me off at home, he stayed for a few minutes with the engine off and confessed that he was having nightmares. He dreamed that he hadn't recorded anything, that there was no proof, that Ray broke into my house and hurt me while he was driving, oblivious to it all. But it didn't happen. I reminded him. You did the right thing, and you saved me. Don't think about what could have happened. He nodded but continued to stare into space. So I stayed with him in the car for another 10 minutes in silence, until he took a deep breath and told me he was better. Sometimes, silent company heals more than 1,000 words. The hospital continued its audit. External auditors came twice a week, men and women in expensive suits and serious expressions who reviewed every paper as if it were evidence of a crime. I guess in a way it was. Patricia was stressed, with permanent dark circles under her eyes and more gray in her hair. Sarah and Lauren complained about the extra pressure, about having to justify every charge, about not being able to leave on time because the auditors always had last-minute questions. I did my job without complaining because I knew it was all necessary, that it was the only way to truly clean up the hospital. One day, one of the auditors stopped me in the hallway and asked if I had noticed anything strange before the case broke. I told him about the missing files Patricia had mentioned, and he took notes with a look of absolute concentration. Then he thanked me and left. I never heard from him again. In April, the trial really began. I was called to testify on a Tuesday morning, which forced me to take the day off from the hospital. Natalie offered to come with me, but I told her it wasn't necessary, that I would go alone. A lie. Arthur showed up at my door at 8 a.m. with the gray Toyota and said, "You're not going to this alone." I didn't argue. I got in the car, and we drove together to the Cook County Courthouse in Chicago, a huge glass and concrete building that seemed designed to intimidate. There were reporters at the entrance, which I didn't expect, and I had to push my way through flashes and questions I didn't understand. Arthur shielded me with his body, placing himself between the cameras and me, and we entered the building without me having to speak to anyone. The waiting area was a long hallway with uncomfortable wooden benches where other witnesses were waiting. I recognized some colleagues from the hospital, Detective Miller, and two men in suits who I assumed were lawyers. Arthur sat next to me, and we waited in silence for 2 hours. Finally, they called my name. I entered the courtroom alone, a large space with high ceilings and that false solemnity of courthouses that has always seemed theatrical to me. The judge was an older man with glasses and a bored expression. The lawyers, 3 on each side, looked ready to attack. And Ray Collins was there, sitting at the defendant's table in a navy blue suit and a stoic expression. When our eyes met, I felt a shiver. He didn't look away. I did. They made me swear on a Bible even though I'm not religious. And then the questions began. The prosecutor asked me about my job, about the missing files, about whether I had noticed anything suspicious. I answered truthfully. I hadn't noticed anything until Arthur told me. Ray's defense attorney tried to make me seem confused. He asked if I was sure about the dates, if I hadn't misinterpreted innocent comments, if my age didn't affect my memory. That last question angered me. My memory works perfectly, thank you, I snapped. The judge called me to order, but I noticed a hint of a smile on his face. The questioning lasted 40 minutes that felt like an eternity. When it was over, I left the courtroom with weak legs and a spinning head. Arthur was waiting for me in the hallway, and without a word, he hugged me. It was a short but necessary hug. Arthur testified after me. He went into the courtroom with a folder full of papers, the transcribed recordings, the noted dates, the routes of the trips with Ray. He was in there for almost an hour. When he came out, he looked exhausted, but relieved. It's done, he told me. It's all been said. We drove home in silence. I looked out the window at the streets of Chicago, the heavy midday traffic, the people walking by, oblivious to the fact that in that courthouse, the fate of several people was being decided. I wondered if Ray would be convicted, if the evidence would be sufficient, if I had said the right thing or if I had messed up. Arthur must have sensed my thoughts because he said, "You did well, Eleanor. You told the truth, and that's all that matters." I wanted to believe him. The trial lasted 3 more weeks. I continued working at the hospital as if nothing had happened, although everyone knew I was involved in the case. Some colleagues looked at me with admiration, others with suspicion, as if I were a snitch who had betrayed the guild. That hurt more than I expected. I hadn't ratted on anyone. I had only tried to protect myself from someone who wanted to harm me. But people see what they want to see. Sarah stopped talking to me, greeting me curtly and avoiding being alone with me. Lauren was friendlier but also more distant. Only Patricia continued to treat me the same, or perhaps better. She would ask how I was, if I needed anything, if the trial was affecting me. I always answered that I was fine, even if it wasn't entirely true. At the end of April, the verdict came. Ray Collins was sentenced to 6 years in prison for ongoing fraud, document forgery, and conspiracy. His accomplices received lesser sentences, between 2 and 4 years. The outside contact, the one who bought the medical data, pleaded guilty and negotiated a reduced sentence in exchange for cooperating with the authorities. The news was in the papers and on television. Medical fraud ring that scammed seniors for years dismantled. I saw my name mentioned in one of the articles as a key witness and felt a mix of shame and anger. I didn't want to be famous. I didn't want my private life in the news. I just wanted to go back to normal. But I discovered that normal is relative. The old normal no longer existed. There was only this new version of my life where I was Eleanor Vance, the old lady who unintentionally uncovered a fraud scheme. Natalie organized a celebration dinner when the sentence was announced. She invited Arthur, Megan, and Claire. She made paella at my house and uncorked a bottle of sparkling wine that I didn't want to drink but drank anyway out of courtesy. Jason made a ridiculous toast, calling me a hero, which made me laugh because hero is a very big word for a woman who just got lucky. Claire, oblivious to it all, ran around the living room chasing the neighbor's cat, which had slipped in through the window. Natalie's kids played with her, and the sound of their laughter filled the house in a way I hadn't felt in months. Arthur sat next to me and said quietly, "Thank you for everything." I looked at him, not understanding. "Thank you for what?" He smiled. "For letting me help you. I needed to feel like I could do something right after so much time doing everything wrong." I squeezed his hand and said nothing, because it wasn't necessary. May arrived with a sudden heat wave. The hospital turned on the air conditioning, which didn't work well, and we all complained about the stuffiness. Patricia announced that the audit was finished and the results were good. They had detected more irregularities, cleaned up the protocols, and fired 2 more people from other departments who were also involved in minor frauds. The hospital was going to receive a transparency certification or something like that, an official seal that proved everything was now working correctly. Sarah and Lauren started talking to me again. Not with the familiarity of before, but at least without hostility. I guess they realized I wasn't the enemy, just someone who had been in the wrong place at the wrong time, or the right place at the right time. It depends on how you look at it. Carol, the new colleague I had given coffee to that night, became my unexpected friend. She also worked the same shifts as me, and we started leaving the hospital together, taking the bus together, and chatting at the bus stop for 10 minutes before going our separate ways. She told me her husband had died of cancer after a 2-year battle, that she had 3 grown children who lived outside of Chicago, that she felt useless and lonely until she got this job. Our stories were similar: recent widows, working past retirement age, looking for meaning in days that had suddenly become empty. We understood each other without needing to explain much. One night, I told her about Ray, the trial, Arthur. She listened with wide eyes and at the end said, "You were so lucky." I nodded. Yes, I had been lucky. Very lucky. In June, Arthur invited me to a special family meal. It was Claire's 3rd birthday, and Megan had organized a party in a park near her apartment. I went with a gift that Natalie helped me choose, an illustrated storybook about a girl who travels the world in a hot air balloon. There were other children at the party, friends Claire had made at daycare, and their parents, young people with complicated lives, trying to make their children happy despite everything. Megan introduced me as my dad's friend who helped us a lot. And although that description was incomplete and strange, I accepted it. Arthur was radiant, playing with Claire, chasing her around the park, carrying her on his shoulders while she squealed with joy. It was a version of him I hadn't seen before, a version that had surely existed years ago when Megan was little, before debts and failure consumed him. That afternoon, watching Arthur play with his granddaughter, I thought about how fragile everything is. I thought about how a man can fall and get back up, can lose his family and get it back, can feel useless and then discover he's capable of saving a life. I thought about myself, how I had gone from being a retired teacher crying silently for her dead husband to a woman who worked at night, who had survived a real threat, who had helped dismantle a fraud scheme. I thought about George and how he never would have imagined this version of my life. I wondered if he would be proud or scared. Probably both. July brought school holidays, and with them, chaos in my house. Natalie asked if I could watch the kids some afternoons because summer camp didn't cover all the days and she had to work. I happily agreed. Having my grandsons running through the yard, shouting, fighting, laughing, filled me with an energy I didn't know I needed. I made them snacks, put on movies, read them stories, and scolded them when they misbehaved. It was exhausting, but comforting. And when Tuesday, Thursday, or Saturday night came, and I had to go to the hospital, I felt a mix of relief and guilt. Relief because a few hours of silence in an office was welcome after the chaos of children. Guilt because part of me felt I should be enjoying them more. That time passes quickly, and you later regret not being more present. One night in July, Arthur didn't show up. I requested a ride as usual, and the screen showed that the assigned driver was someone else. I found it strange but didn't think much of it. Maybe he had another trip. Maybe he was resting. But when I requested a ride again the following Thursday, it wasn't him either. Nor on Saturday, nor the Tuesday of the next week. I started to worry. I texted him through the app asking if he was okay. He didn't reply. I sent a regular text message. Nothing. I called. It went to voicemail. Unease settled in my stomach like a stone. I asked Megan. I went to her apartment one Sunday and told her I hadn't heard from her father, that he wasn't responding to messages, that he wasn't picking me up. Megan was quiet for a moment and then sighed. "My dad's going through a rough patch," she said. "He's having some health problems. Nothing serious, but they told him to stop working so much, to rest." I asked what the problem was, and she dodged the question. "Age stuff, Eleanor. You know how he is. He doesn't want to worry anyone." But I saw in her eyes that it was more than that. I insisted. Finally, Megan gave in. They found a problem with his heart, arrhythmias. The doctor told him he shouldn't drive until it stabilizes. He's on medication, but you know my dad. He doesn't listen. I was speechless. Arthur, sick. Arthur, with heart problems. The man who had saved me now needed saving himself. I went to see him at his house the next day. He lived in a small 2-bedroom apartment in an old building without an elevator, on the 3rd floor. I climbed the stairs, my knees protesting, and knocked on his door. He opened it in pajamas and a robe, with several days' growth of beard and a face that looked like he hadn't slept well. "Eleanor, you didn't have to come," he said in a tired voice. "Of course I had to," I replied, walking in without waiting for an invitation. The apartment was a mess. Dirty dishes in the sink, clothes on the sofa, curtains drawn. I started tidying up without asking permission. He protested weakly, but eventually sat on the sofa and let me do it. I washed the dishes, folded the clothes, opened the curtains. Then I sat next to him and asked what was really going on. He told me everything. The arrhythmias had started months ago, but he ignored them, thinking it was just stress. They got worse after the trial, with palpitations that woke him up at night, dizziness while driving. He finally went to the doctor and was diagnosed with a ventricular arrhythmia that needed urgent treatment. They prescribed medication and forbade him from driving until further notice. Without being able to drive, he had no income, and without income, he couldn't pay rent or help Megan. He was back in that pit he thought he had escaped, that spiral of debt and failure that had destroyed him years ago. "I can't fall back in, Eleanor," he said with a broken voice. "I can't go back to being that useless man." I took his hands, the hands that had held the steering wheel so many nights taking me home, and said, "You're not going to fall. You're not alone this time." I asked him how much he needed to get by until he recovered. He gave me a figure, about $2,000 to cover 3 months of rent, food, and medicine while he stabilized. I had savings, not much, but enough. I offered to lend him the money. He vehemently refused. "I'm not taking your money, Eleanor. You've already done too much for me." We argued for half an hour. I insisted. He refused. Finally, we reached an agreement. It wasn't a loan. It was an advance for all the trips he had given me for free or at a discount without my knowledge. Because yes, at some point in the argument, Megan had confessed that her father often didn't charge me for the full ride, that he paid the difference out of his own pocket. That made me angry and emotional in equal parts. So I gave him the money and didn't take no for an answer. During July and August, I went to see him 3 times a week. I brought him prepared food, made sure he took his medication, and forced him to go for walks, even if it was just to the park next door. Megan also went to see him, but she had Claire and work, so I took care of the daily visits. I became a kind of unofficial nurse, checking his vitals, noting symptoms, accompanying him to cardiologist appointments. The doctor told me Arthur was improving, that the medication was working, that in a couple of months he could drive again. That gave us hope. One afternoon in August, as we were sitting on his sofa watching some absurd TV show, Arthur said, "Eleanor, you saved me." I looked at him, not understanding. "What are you talking about? You were the one who saved me from Ray." He shook his head. "I protected you from Ray, yes, but you saved me from myself. For years, I felt useless, like a failure, a burden to my family. And then you showed up, with your coffee, your hot chocolate, your way of listening without judgment. You made me feel like I was still good for something, that I could still protect someone. And then you gave me a reason to reconnect with my daughter, to meet my granddaughter. You did all that." A lump formed in my throat. I didn't know what to say. I hugged him, a long hug that neither of us wanted to end. And in that moment, I understood something I had forgotten. Saving someone isn't always a heroic, spectacular act. Sometimes it's just a cup of coffee, a conversation in a car, being there when someone needs you. September arrived with the return to routine. The kids went back to school. Natalie went back to her work chaos. And I continued working at the hospital. Carol and I had become inseparable at work, so much so that Sarah and Lauren joked that we seemed like a pair of cranky old ladies. We laughed because they were right. We were both widows, both had grown children, both worked to not feel useless. We understood each other on a level that the younger girls couldn't, and that was okay. Arthur started driving again in October, almost a year after our first trip together. The doctor gave him the all-clear on the condition that he had monthly checkups, and continued to take his medication religiously. The first night he picked me up from the hospital again, I felt a disproportionate joy. I got into the gray Toyota as if I were returning home after a long journey, and Arthur greeted me with a huge smile. "Did you miss me?" he asked. "Not a bit," I lied. We both knew the truth. We resumed our Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday routine. I still brought him hot chocolate, he still drove carefully, and those 12 minutes were still the best part of my nights. We talked about everything and nothing, about Claire and her antics, about Megan and her new job at a daycare, about Natalie and my grandsons, about Carol and her stories from the hospital. We talked about politics without getting angry, about football without understanding it, about life without pretending to have answers. And sometimes we didn't talk at all, just traveled in comfortable silence while the city slept around us. One night in November, near the end of my shift, something happened that reminded me why everything I had experienced that year made sense. I was reviewing invoices when I found an irregularity in the billing for an 82-year-old patient. It was a charge for an MRI that, according to the system, had been performed. But when I checked the medical history, there was no MRI report. I requested the physical file, and it didn't exist. It was the exact same pattern Ray Collins had used: phantom charges to elderly patients who didn't check their bills carefully. My heart raced. Was it possible someone was still doing this? Hadn't they cleaned up the hospital properly? I didn't hesitate. I went straight to Patricia's office, even though it was almost 11 p.m. and she wasn't usually there at that hour. Luckily, she was there, finishing up paperwork. I showed her what I had found. She became serious, reviewed the documents with me, checked the systems, and we found more. 5 more cases in the last 2 months, all with the same pattern. Patricia immediately called Detective Miller. She arrived at the hospital within half an hour with 2 officers. They reviewed everything that night and discovered that the person responsible was an administrative clerk from the day shift who had slipped through the first audit because he didn't work nights like Ray. He had only been scamming for 3 months but had already fraudulently charged over $15,000. They arrested him the next day. This time there was no long trial or newspaper headlines. It was a quick case, clear evidence, and immediate confession. The guy had gambling debts and had seen an opportunity when Ray was arrested. He thought no one would be paying attention anymore. He was wrong. Patricia thanked me profusely, as did the detective. I felt proud, but mostly I felt that it was worth it to keep paying attention, to keep reviewing every invoice carefully, to keep doing my job well, even if it was monotonous and boring. Because behind those numbers were real people who trusted the system to work correctly. I told Arthur what had happened that night as he drove me home. He listened in silence and finally said, "You see, Eleanor, you save lives too, in your own way, but you save them." I shook my head. "I just do my job." He smiled. "Exactly. And that's more than a lot of people do." I didn't argue anymore because I knew he was right, even if it was hard for me to accept. The Sunday dinners had become the axis around which my week revolved. It wasn't that the rest of the days were empty, but there was something about those gatherings that filled me in a way I hadn't experienced since George died. Maybe it was the noise of the children running through the yard, maybe the overlapping conversations of the adults in the kitchen, maybe just knowing there was a place where I was needed and loved unconditionally. Natalie always arrived loaded with Tupperware and grocery bags, even though I kept telling her she didn't need to bring anything. Jason took charge of the barbecue with exaggerated seriousness, as if he were performing open-heart surgery instead of grilling sausages. Megan and Natalie had become real friends, the kind who tell each other things without a filter and laugh at silly things with complicity. And Arthur, well, Arthur had become something like an older brother, the figure I never had, who now appeared in my life when I least expected it. Claire had turned 3.5 and was the undisputed queen of those Sundays. She bossed my grandsons around despite being the youngest, organized incomprehensible games with rules that changed every 5 minutes, and demanded that all the adults participate in her improvised plays, where she was always the princess and we were the subjects. One afternoon, I had to play the dragon and had to crawl on the living room floor growling while she defeated me with a plastic sword. Arthur recorded the whole thing on his phone and later showed me the video. I saw myself, a 64-year-old woman, crawling on the floor and growling like an animal. And instead of feeling embarrassed, I burst out laughing. George would never have seen me do that. He was more traditional, more serious, more about keeping up appearances. And I had been like that too, for 40 years. But something in me had changed. Maybe it was age, maybe it was having brushed with danger. Maybe it was simply that I no longer cared so much what others thought. In December, the hospital organized a Christmas lunch for all the staff. It was at a restaurant downtown, one of those places with white tablecloths and waiters in bow ties that make you feel out of place. I didn't want to go. I've never liked company parties. But Patricia insisted. Eleanor, you've done a lot for this hospital this year. You have to come. Carol insisted too. Let's go together. And if it's boring, we'll sneak out early. So I went. I wore a navy blue dress I had bought for a cousin's wedding years ago and had barely worn. I put on a little makeup because Natalie had given me a makeup kit that I never used, and I showed up at the restaurant at the appointed time. There were about 50 people, including doctors, nurses, administrative staff, and cleaning crew. Patricia gave a speech about the year we'd had, the challenges overcome, the importance of transparency and honesty in our work. She didn't directly mention the Ray Collins case, but we all knew what she was referring to. Then we toasted with cheap sparkling wine, and the meal began. I was seated between Carol and a young doctor from the ER who spent the entire meal on his phone with someone from the hospital because there was an emergency. Carol and I chatted about our things, ignoring the rest of the table. Halfway through the meal, Patricia stood up again and asked for silence. I want to make a special mention, she said, looking directly at me. Eleanor Vance has been working with us for less than a year, but her attention to detail and her integrity have been fundamental in cleaning this hospital of fraudulent practices. Not once, but twice. So I want everyone to raise a glass to Eleanor. The entire room turned to me and applauded. I turned as red as a tomato. I wanted to disappear under the table, but Carol nudged me and forced me to stand up and wave. It was horribly awkward and strangely gratifying at the same time. After the meal, Sarah approached me. She had been distant for months, but that day she seemed different. Maybe the sparkling wine had softened her up. Eleanor, I want to apologize, she said. I was horrible to you after the thing with Ray. I thought you were a snitch. But now I understand you were just protecting yourself. And in doing so, you protected everyone. I didn't expect that apology. I told her it was okay, that I understood her, that difficult situations bring out the worst in us sometimes. We shared an awkward hug, and from that day on, we spoke to each other normally again. We weren't close friends, but we were colleagues who respected each other, and that was enough. That Christmas was different from all the previous ones. The first Christmas without George had been horrible. The year before, when his absence was still fresh and every ornament on the tree reminded me of him. But this second Christmas was more bearable. I still missed him. That didn't change. But the pain had become duller, more manageable. Natalie organized Christmas Eve dinner at my house and invited Arthur, Megan, and Claire. It was a noisy, chaotic Christmas Eve, full of kids running around and adults trying to coordinate dinner. We burned the lamb because Jason got distracted watching football, so we ended up eating roasted chicken from the supermarket, and nobody complained. Claire fell asleep at 11 with her head on my lap, while the adults continued to chat. Arthur carefully picked her up and carried her to the sofa. He covered her with a blanket and returned to the table. We talked until 2 in the morning about everything and nothing, with that comfort you only get with people who accept you as you are. We celebrated New Year's the same way, all together at my house. At midnight, we toasted with sparkling wine and ate grapes while the kids made noise with noisemakers and party favors. I made 3 wishes: health for everyone, for Arthur's heart to stay well, and for this year to be quieter than the last. I know wishes don't magically come true, but I needed to verbalize them, even if only in my head. Arthur caught me with my eyes closed after the countdown and asked what I had wished for. I told him it was a secret. He smiled and told me he had wished for me to stay in his life, not to disappear like other important people he had lost. That stirred something inside me. I squeezed his arm and told him I wasn't planning on going anywhere. January was tough, as always. The cold was biting, and Chicago was filled with that dampness that gets into your bones. At the hospital, the atmosphere was tense because of budget cuts and rumors of layoffs. Patricia was worried. She said they had asked her to reduce staff, but she would refuse as much as she could. Sarah was anxious because she was the last one hired and feared being the first to go. Lauren, younger and with fewer burdens, seemed less worried, but was also nervous. Carol confessed to me one night that if they laid her off, she wouldn't know what to do, that she needed the job not just for the money, but for the routine, for having a place to go, for not being alone at home thinking about her dead husband. I understood her perfectly because I felt the same. The layoffs came at the end of January. There weren't many, 5 people in total from different departments, but the blow was felt just the same. Sarah wasn't laid off, to her relief, but an administrative assistant from the day shift was. That meant more work for everyone. Patricia called us into a meeting and explained that we would have to absorb the tasks of the laid-off assistant, that she would try to hire someone soon. But for now, there was no budget. I accepted without complaining, as did Carol, but Sarah and Lauren protested. They said it wasn't fair, that we already worked enough, that we were being exploited. They were right. But protesting wasn't going to change anything, so we started working twice as hard. February was a blur of excessive work and accumulated fatigue. I would get home past midnight with my back killing me and my eyes burning from staring at the computer screen. Arthur picked me up all 3 nights and always commented that I looked more tired, that I should rest, that at my age it wasn't good to push so hard. I told him I was fine, that I could handle it, but the truth is I was starting to feel the weight of my years. One night, I felt dizzy at the office and had to sit with my head between my knees until it passed. Carol got scared and wanted to call an ambulance, but I refused. "It's just fatigue," I told her. "I need to sleep better." She wasn't convinced, but she let it go. Natalie found out I was working too much because one night she called and I didn't answer. I was so exhausted that I had fallen asleep on the sofa at 9 p.m. with the TV on. When I woke up at 3 a.m., I had 17 missed calls from Natalie and 3 from Arthur. I called them immediately to reassure them. I explained it was just a slip-up, that I was fine, but Natalie came over the next day in a fury. "Mom, this can't go on. You're killing yourself with work. Quit that damn job and let me help you financially." We argued for an hour. She insisted. I refused. We finally reached a compromise. I would continue working, but I would reduce my shifts to 2 nights a week instead of 3. Patricia agreed when I proposed it. She said she understood and that my circumstances justified it. So, from March on, I only worked Tuesdays and Thursdays. Saturdays were free, and that changed my life. Having 1 extra day of rest allowed me to regain my strength, sleep better, and feel less like a zombie. In March, Megan asked me for a huge favor. Her daycare was organizing a 2-day trip to a state park with the kids, and they needed adult chaperones. She asked if I could watch Claire for those 2 days. "My dad's working, and I can't ask anyone else," she explained. I agreed without hesitation. Claire came to sleep over at my house for 2 nights, and it was chaotic and wonderful in equal parts. The girl had boundless energy. She wanted to play all the time, asked 1,000 questions a minute, and didn't want to go to sleep until after 11. But she was also affectionate, funny, and had that childlike ability to find magic in the simplest things. One afternoon, I took her to the park, and we spent 2 hours chasing pigeons and collecting pine cones. For her, it was the greatest adventure in the world. For me, it was a reminder that happiness doesn't have to be complicated. The second night, Claire slept at my house. When I finally managed to get her to bed after 3 stories and 2 glasses of water, I sat on the edge of her bed watching her sleep. Her brown hair was spread across the pillow, her mouth slightly open, one arm hugging her earless stuffed bunny. And suddenly, an emotion I didn't expect washed over me. It wasn't sadness or joy, it was something deeper. It was gratitude. Gratitude for being alive, for having survived everything that had happened, for having this child sleeping in my house, trusting me. I thought about the entire journey I had taken from George's funeral to this moment. I thought about how easy it would have been to give up, to stay at home crying in my loneliness, to let self-pity consume me. But I didn't. I looked for a job, endured night shifts, survived a real threat, uncovered fraud, made new friends, built an improbable family. And now here I was, taking care of the granddaughter of a man who had been a stranger just over a year ago. Life is strange and surprising when you let it be. April brought good news. Patricia got the budget to hire someone new. They held interviews for 2 weeks and finally chose a young man of 25 named David, a recent business administration graduate, eager to take on the world. He was polite, hardworking, and a bit naive, the kind who still believes the system works perfectly and that people are inherently good. Sarah and Lauren made fun of him behind his back. They said he was a yuppie who wouldn't last 2 months. Carol and I defended him. Leave him alone. We were all new ones, we'd say. David started working the evening shift with us, and I was in charge of teaching him everything. I explained how the billing system worked, what to look for in the files, how to deal with angry patients on the phone. I also told him, without going into too much detail, what had happened with Ray Collins. You have to check everything carefully, I told him. You never know where a fraud might be hiding. He looked at me with wide eyes and nodded seriously, like a dedicated student. One night, David stayed after his shift to ask me something personal. We were alone in the office. I was finishing up organizing some papers before leaving. Eleanor, can I ask you a question? He asked shyly. Of course, I replied. How do you keep working at your age? I mean, no offense, but you could be retired, resting, enjoying your family. Why are you still here? The question caught me off guard. No one had ever asked me that so directly. I thought for a moment before answering. I work because it makes me feel useful, I finally said. Because I like having a routine, a purpose. Because I was widowed. And if I had stayed at home alone, I would have gone crazy. And because it turns out I'm good at this, at reviewing invoices and finding errors, and that has value. He nodded slowly. That makes sense, he said. I thought people only worked for money, but there's more to it than that, isn't there? Much more, I confirmed. May was a quiet month finally. No emergencies, no discovered frauds, no personal dramas, just routine work, Sunday dinners, conversations in the car with Arthur. Normality felt precious after so much chaos. One afternoon, Carol invited me for coffee at her place. She lived in a bright apartment near the hospital, filled with photos of her children and grandchildren on the walls. She showed me old albums, told me stories from when her kids were little, from when her husband was still alive. We talked about our dead spouses with the naturalness of someone who has already processed their grief, without drama or tears. Sometimes I miss him, she said. But other times I like having the bed to myself and not having to cook for 2. I laughed because I felt the exact same way. There's a strange freedom in widowhood that no one tells you about. A freedom that comes with guilt because you're supposed to be heartbroken all the time, but the truth is that life goes on and you go on with it, and sometimes that's okay. June brought Arthur's birthday. He was turning 57, and Megan organized a surprise dinner at an Italian restaurant. She invited our entire makeshift family. Natalie, Jason, the kids, Carol, and me. Arthur had no idea. Megan had told him they were going out to dinner, just the 2 of them, and when he arrived at the restaurant and saw all of us there, he froze. Then his eyes filled with tears, and he had to fake a cough. It was a beautiful, noisy dinner with too much food and too much wine. The kids ran between the tables until a waiter asked us to please control them. We sang Happy Birthday off-key, and Arthur blew out the candles with Claire in his arms. We gave him practical gifts, a new jacket because his was frayed, a toolkit for the car, books. I gave him a frame with a photo I had taken a few weeks earlier, him playing with Claire in the park, both of them laughing, with the evening light illuminating them. When he opened the gift, he stared at the photo for a long time. Then he hugged me without saying a word. It wasn't necessary. July and August passed in a flash. The heat was unbearable. The hospital turned into an oven despite the air conditioning, and we were all in a bad mood. David went on vacation for all of August, something the rest of us couldn't afford, and his absence meant more work. But we managed. Carol and I developed a system. We took turns taking breaks every hour, went out to the hospital terrace for fresh air, brought each other ice cream from the cafe downstairs. Sarah and Lauren joined our breaks, and gradually the atmosphere improved. We even laughed from time to time, something that seemed impossible at the beginning of the year. In September, a year after Arthur first picked me up, he suggested we take a trip. Eleanor, we should celebrate our anniversary, he told me one night as he drove me home. What anniversary? I asked, confused. A year since you started using my rideshare. A year since we met. I laughed. Arthur, that's not a real anniversary. It is to me, he insisted. That trip changed my life. I want to celebrate it. What do you think about going to a state park for a weekend? Megan can come with Claire, Natalie with your family, Carol too. We can rent a big cabin and spend the weekend together. The idea seemed ridiculous and wonderful at the same time. Okay, I said, but I choose the cabin. I found a cabin in Starved Rock State Park with enough room for 10 people. It had a huge yard, a fireplace, and views of the woods. We rented it for the first weekend of October. We all went. Arthur, Megan and Claire, Natalie, Jason, and my 2 grandsons, Carol and me. David was missing, but we hadn't invited him because we barely knew him. It was 2 perfect days. The kids played in the yard. The adults cooked together, went on short hikes, and played board games at night. Claire insisted we all sleep in the living room like it was a campout, so we pulled out mattresses and blankets and slept piled up like sardines. It was uncomfortable and perfect. The last night, when the kids were asleep and the adults were drinking wine by the fireplace, Arthur made a toast. To Eleanor, he said, who saved my life without knowing it, and to all of you, who welcomed me into your family without asking why. We toasted and then sat in silence, watching the fire, each lost in our own thoughts. On the way home Sunday night, as Arthur drove me from the park to my house in Oak Park, we talked about how much our lives had changed in a year. A year ago, I was a broken man driving to survive, he said. And now I have a family, a granddaughter who knows me, a daughter who loves me, real friends. All thanks to you. I shook my head. It's not thanks to me, Arthur. It's thanks to you. You made the right decisions when it mattered. You protected me when I was in danger. You rebuilt your relationship with Megan. I was just there. Being there is enough, he replied. Sometimes, being there is all someone needs. October brought an unexpected change. Patricia called me into her office on a Tuesday afternoon before my shift started. I thought I had done something wrong, that maybe she was going to scold me for some mistake I didn't remember making, but instead she offered me a promotion. Eleanor, I want you to be the night shift supervisor. It means more responsibility, but also more pay. An extra $300 a month. You would coordinate Sarah, Lauren, and David. Review their work. Report directly to me. What do you say? I was speechless. Patricia, I have no experience supervising anyone. You have experience being a teacher for 40 years? She retorted. That's supervising 30 kids at once. 3 adults can't be more difficult. She had a point. I accepted the promotion. Sarah took it badly when she found out. She had been at the hospital longer than I had and thought the position should have been hers. We had a tense conversation where she accused me of being Patricia's favorite for uncovering the frauds. It's not fair, Eleanor. I've worked here for 5 years, and you've only been here for 1. I understood her frustration. You're right. It's not fair, I said. But the decision wasn't mine. If you want, talk to Patricia. Maybe she can explain her reasons better. And I promise I'm not going to change anything. I'm not going to be an authoritarian boss. I'll just do my job. She calmed down a bit but was still resentful. It took weeks for our relationship to return to normal. As a supervisor, my routine changed. I now arrived half an hour earlier to review the work of the afternoon shift. I coordinated the night's tasks, solved problems that weren't my responsibility before. It was more work, but also more interesting, and the extra money was welcome. I could afford small luxuries, dining out with Carol once a month, buying better gifts for my grandsons, helping Natalie when her kids needed new school books. I was still careful with money. I wasn't going to change that after a lifetime of austerity. But having a little more leeway gave me peace of mind. November was the month I almost lost Arthur for the 2nd time. One night Megan called me crying. My dad's in the hospital. Another arrhythmia, but worse this time. The doctors say he needs a pacemaker. I went to the hospital immediately, even though it was my night off. I found him in the ER, connected to machines, looking pale and scared. Eleanor, I don't want to die, he said when he saw me. You're not going to die, I replied with more conviction than I felt. They're going to put in the pacemaker, and you're going to live another 30 years minimum. Megan was sitting by his side, holding his hand, with Claire asleep in a chair in the hallway. I told her to go home, to rest, that I would stay with her father. She protested, but finally agreed. She took Claire, and I stayed all night in the ER with Arthur, watching bad shows on the wall-mounted TV, chatting about nonsense to keep him distracted. They operated the next day. The surgery lasted 3 hours that felt like an eternity to me. I waited in the waiting room with Megan, Natalie, Carol, and Jason, who had come as soon as they heard. When the surgeon came out and said everything had gone well, Megan burst into tears of relief. Arthur spent 2 days in the hospital recovering, and we all visited him in shifts. We brought him real food because the hospital food was inedible. We brought him books and magazines, kept him company. Claire drew him a huge card with markers that said, "I love you, Grandpa," with adorable misspellings. Arthur hung it on his room wall and looked at it all the time with shining eyes. When he was discharged, Megan insisted he go live with her temporarily. "You can't be alone while you recover," she told him. Arthur reluctantly agreed. He spent a month at his daughter's house, and during that time, I visited him almost every day. I brought him hot chocolate, sat next to him on the sofa, and we watched TV in silence or chatted about unimportant things. One afternoon, he told me, "Eleanor, if I had died on that operating table, I would have died happy. Because these last 2 years have been the best of my life. I got my family back. I met you. I found a purpose. Not everyone is that lucky." I squeezed his hand and said nothing because I had a lump in my throat that wouldn't let me speak. December arrived with its usual Christmas madness. The hospital was filled with decorations, the streets with lights, the stores with horrible music on a loop. But this year, everything seemed more bearable, more beautiful even. Arthur fully recovered from the pacemaker surgery, started driving again, and began picking me up on Tuesdays and Thursdays again. Carol gave me a wool shawl that she had knitted herself. Natalie organized another Christmas Eve at my house with the whole family. This time, we didn't burn anything, and dinner was a success. Claire, now 4, sang a Christmas carol she had learned at daycare, and we all applauded as if it were a professional concert. On New Year's Eve, as we ate grapes and made toasts, I thought about everything that had happened in 2 years. 2 years since George died and my life fell apart. 2 years since I started working at that hospital out of sheer financial need. 2 years since a man named Arthur accepted my first rideshare trip and without knowing it became my lifesaver. I thought about Ray Collins and how close I had been to disaster. I thought about the uncovered frauds, the protected lives, the work I had done without realizing its importance. I thought about this strange family I had built with the scraps of broken lives, and I thought about myself, the woman I was and the woman I was now. I was no longer the Eleanor who cried silently in an empty house. I was a stronger, braver Eleanor, more connected to the world and to the people who mattered. I hadn't sought this transformation. It had simply happened, step by step, ride by ride, conversation by conversation. After midnight, when the kids were playing with party favors and the adults were chatting relaxedly, Arthur took me aside to the yard. It was cold, but the sky was clear, and you could see the stars, a rare thing in Chicago. "Eleanor, I have to tell you something," he began. I got nervous. "What's wrong? Is your heart okay?" "I'm fine. It's not that," he reassured me. "I've just been thinking. You changed my life and I changed yours. And that's something you don't find easily. So I want you to know that no matter what happens, I'll always be here for you. Not just as the guy who gives you a ride, but as real family. Because that's what you are to me. Family." He hugged me, and I hugged him back, and we stood there for a while. 2 people who had met by chance and had held on to each other to keep from sinking. January of the new year brought an unexpected surprise. David, the young man who had started working in April, asked me for advice about his personal life. He was in love with a girl who worked at another hospital but didn't dare tell her. "Eleanor, you've lived so much. What would you advise?" he asked. I laughed at the idea that my life could serve as an example for anyone. "David, the only thing I can tell you is that life is short, and opportunities don't repeat themselves. If you like that girl, tell her. The worst that can happen is she says no, and that won't kill you." What might kill you is spending years wondering what would have happened if you had dared. He nodded thoughtfully. A week later, he told me he had asked the girl out to dinner and she had accepted. Thanks, Eleanor, he said. I don't know if it will work out, but at least I tried. I felt ridiculously proud, as if I had achieved something important when I had only given obvious advice. February was quiet, so was March. The routine had settled into a comfortable rhythm. Work, Sunday dinners, conversations in the car, visits with Carol, time with my grandsons. Nothing spectacular, but satisfying. One afternoon, as I was reviewing invoices at the office, I found myself thinking about what my life would have been like if George hadn't died, if I hadn't needed to work, if I had never met Arthur. I would probably be at home watching TV, bored, feeling useless, waiting for Natalie's Sunday visits as if they were the only important thing in my week. I wouldn't have met Carol or Megan or Claire. I wouldn't have uncovered frauds or saved seniors from scams. I wouldn't have discovered I was capable of more than I thought. And even though I missed George, even though there were still nights when his absence hurt, I wouldn't trade this life for that one. This life, with all its problems and chaos, was more authentically mine. In April, the hospital organized a recognition event for staff who had helped clean up the fraudulent practices. I was one of the honorees. They gave me a framed diploma and a bouquet of flowers, and Patricia gave a speech about the importance of integrity at work. It was embarrassing, but nice. Natalie came to the event with my grandsons. Arthur showed up too, and Carol was there, of course. Afterward, we all went out to eat at a restaurant and celebrated as if I had won a Nobel Prize. My grandsons wanted to know what exactly I had done to deserve the diploma. I explained in simple terms that I had helped uncover bad people who were stealing money from old folks. The older one, who was 9, looked at me with admiration and said, "Grandma, you're like a detective." I laughed. Something like that, I told him. May brought Claire's second birthday that I celebrated with her. She was turning 4.5, though nobody celebrates half birthdays except her, who insisted it was important. Megan organized a snack party in the park with other kids from daycare. I helped with the food, making sandwiches and a homemade cake. Claire introduced me to her little friends as my Grandma Eleanor, and although I wasn't her blood grandmother, nobody corrected her. To her, I was her grandma. And that filled me with a happiness I didn't know I needed. June was the month Carol confessed she had started dating someone, a widower from her building who had lost his wife 3 years ago. "It's nothing serious," she told me, embarrassed. "We just have coffee, sometimes go to the movies, but I like having company." I hugged her and told her I thought it was wonderful, that she deserved to be happy, that her dead husband wouldn't want her to spend the rest of her life alone. She cried a little, with relief, I think, because she was afraid I would judge her. But how could I judge her? I perfectly understood the need for company, for not being alone, for building something new on the ruins of the old. July was hot and exhausting, August worse, but we got through it as always. September brought the second anniversary of my first ride with Arthur. This time, we didn't organize any special trip, just a quiet dinner at my house with the usual family. But we toasted to those 2 years, to everything we had lived through, to everything we had survived. Claire, who was now almost 5, asked what we were toasting to. I explained that we were celebrating the day her grandfather and I met. "And that's important because now we're all a family," I told her. She nodded seriously and raised her juice glass. "To family," she said in a solemn voice. "To family," we all repeated. October arrived with rain and cool temperatures. One night, as Arthur was driving me home from work, he asked me something I didn't expect. "Eleanor, are you happy?" The question caught me off guard. "What's that about?" I asked. "Just curious," he said. "You've been working nights for 2 years, doing a job that isn't exactly glamorous, dealing with a complicated past. And I wonder if you're happy, or if you're just surviving," I thought before answering. "I think I'm happy," I finally said. Not in that explosive way they show you in movies, but in a quieter way. I have a job I like, a family that loves me, real friends. I miss George. I always will, but I'm not drowning in that sadness anymore. So yes, I think I'm happy. And you? He smiled. Me too, he said. And we continued driving in comfortable silence, as we had done hundreds of times before. November arrived with that particular melancholy that late autumn brings, when the days get shorter and Chicago is filled with dry leaves that crunch under your feet. The hospital had entered its pre-winter routine with that gradual increase in flu and colds that filled the emergency rooms. In administration, we noticed the increased workload, but we were used to it. David had become a valuable member of the team. He had lost that initial naivety but maintained his enthusiasm, which I valued. Sarah had finally gotten over her resentment about my promotion, and we now worked well together. She had even become protective of me, like an older sister looking out for the younger one, even though I was decades older. Lauren was still Lauren, efficient but distant, doing her job without getting too personally involved in anything. And Carol had fallen in love. She didn't admit it openly, but I saw it in her eyes when she talked about Ramon, the widower from her building. They had been dating for 6 months, and the transformation in her was remarkable. She smiled more, styled her hair differently, even bought new clothes. One night, she confessed that she felt guilty for being happy, as if she were betraying the memory of her dead husband. Eleanor, we were married for 42 years. I feel like a silly teenager when I'm with Ramon. And then I come home and see my husband's photo and I feel horrible. I understood that guilt perfectly. Although my situation was different, I had also felt something similar when I realized I no longer cried every night for George, when I discovered I could go days without thinking about him. Carol, your husband is dead, I told her with the bluntness that only true friendship allows. You're not. And he wouldn't want you to spend the rest of your life mourning him. He would want you to be happy. So stop feeling guilty and enjoy Ramon. She nodded with teary eyes and hugged me. Thanks for understanding, she whispered. Always, I replied. In mid-November, Natalie gave me news I wasn't expecting. She was pregnant. At 38, with 2 children already 9 and 7, she and Jason had decided to have a third. Mom, I know it's crazy at my age, but we felt like something was missing, that the family wasn't complete. I hugged her tightly, excited and worried in equal parts. Excited because I was going to have another grandchild, worried because Natalie was already always exhausted with 2 kids and a demanding job. How are you going to manage? I asked her. I don't know, she admitted. But we will. We always do. She was right. Natalie was one of those people who find a way to make everything work, even if they don't know how. I offered to help, of course. When the baby is born, you can count on me for whatever you need. Watching him, picking up the kids from school, whatever. She looked at me with gratitude. Mom, you already do so much. I don't want to overwork you. I won't be overworked, I assured her. I have plenty of energy. That wasn't entirely true. The truth is, at 65, I was starting to feel the fatigue more persistently. My knees ached in the mornings, my back complained after long nights sitting, and there were days I needed a 2-hour nap to recover, but I wasn't going to admit it, especially not when Natalie needed me. So I kept working my 2 nights a week. I kept participating in Sunday dinners. I kept being the active grandmother who played with the kids in the yard, even if I had to take 2 ibuprofen afterward to soothe my back pain. Arthur noticed my fatigue, too. One night, after picking me up from the hospital, he said, Eleanor, you're exhausted. I can see it in your face. I wanted to deny it, but he insisted. Don't pretend with me. I know you. I know when you're fine and when you're pushing yourself. Why don't you cut back your hours more, or retire for good? The word retirement made me uncomfortable. It made me feel old, useless, as if my working life was over and all that was left was to wait for death. I don't want to retire, I said with more sharpness than necessary. I need to work. I need to feel useful. He didn't argue further, but I saw in his eyes that he wasn't convinced. He was right to worry, but I was stubborn. I always had been. December brought the 3rd Christmas without George. It didn't hurt like the previous ones. Time had done its work, softening the wound. But there were still moments of sharp sadness. One afternoon, while decorating the Christmas tree with my grandsons, I came across an ornament George had bought on one of our trips to Lake Geneva. It was a hand-painted shell with the date engraved, August 1998. I stared at it for a long time, remembering that summer, remembering how George had haggled with the vendor until he got a ridiculously low price, remembering how we had laughed together at his thriftiness. The memory no longer tore me apart as it once did. It just made me gently sad. My older grandson saw me with the shell in my hand and asked, "Is that ornament special, Grandma?" "Yes," I said. "Your grandpa bought it many years ago." "The one who's dead?" he asked with that childlike frankness that knows no taboos. "That's the one," I confirmed. "Do you miss him?" he asked. "Every day," I replied. "But it's okay to miss the people we love. It's part of moving on." I don't know if he understood what I said, but he nodded seriously and helped me hang the shell on the tree. Christmas Eve was at my house again with the whole family. This time, Ramon, Carol's boyfriend, joined us. A quiet 68-year-old man with a shy smile and good manners, he fit surprisingly well into our family chaos. He played with the kids, helped Jason with the indoor barbecue that actually worked this year, and chatted with Arthur about cars with that passion only men of a certain age have when they talk about mechanics. Carol looked at me from across the table with grateful eyes, and I winked back at her. I was glad to see her happy. We all deserved a little happiness after so much pain. Claire, who was now 5.5 and thought she was very grown up, had prepared a Christmas carol to sing for us after dinner. Megan had made her a shepherdess costume out of an old sheet, and Claire took it with professional seriousness. She sang for us in an off-key but enthusiastic voice, while we applauded and recorded with our phones. Arthur cried openly without trying to hide it, and Megan handed him a tissue, laughing and crying too. I thought about how this scene wouldn't have existed without that first night in the hospital parking lot, without that gray Toyota, without Arthur's decision to record Ray's conversations. Everything was connected in ways we never could have imagined. We celebrated New Year's the same way, all together at my house. This time, everyone ate their grapes without choking, which was an achievement. We toasted to the year that was ending and the one that was beginning. I made 3 wishes. Health for everyone, for Natalie's pregnancy to go well, and for this year to be quieter than the last. I didn't ask for anything for myself because I felt I already had everything I needed. After midnight, when the kids were playing and the adults were chatting relaxedly, Natalie sat next to me and said, "Mom, I'm scared about the pregnancy. I'm almost 40. It's a high-risk pregnancy, and I don't know if I can handle it all." I took her hand. "You can," I told her. "And I'll be there to help you. You're not alone." She rested her head on my shoulder, just like she did when she was little and afraid of the dark. "Thanks, Mom," she whispered, "for everything." January of the new year brought a polar vortex and the confirmation that Natalie was expecting a girl. She and Jason were thrilled, and so were the kids, although the older one asked if they could trade her for a brother because there were already enough girls in the family. Natalie patiently explained that no, it didn't work like that, and he would have to learn to love his little sister. The boy accepted with resignation. I started knitting a baby blanket with pink wool, something I hadn't done since Natalie was a baby. Carol taught me some stitches I had forgotten, and we spent afternoons at my house knitting and chatting. It was comforting to do something with my hands, something tangible that I could touch and use. In February, the hospital announced another round of cuts, this time more severe. Patricia called us into a meeting and explained with an exhausted face that they would have to lay off more people, that those of us who remained would have to work more hours, that there was no other option. Sarah started crying in the middle of the meeting, convinced she would be laid off. Lauren was pale. David seemed in shock. Carol and I exchanged worried glances. In the end, they laid off 3 people from other departments, but none of us. However, our hours were increased. We would now have to work until midnight instead of 11:30. Half an hour doesn't seem like much, but when you're 65 and tired, half an hour is an eternity. I endured the new hours for 3 weeks before I collapsed. One night in the middle of my shift, I felt dizzy as I had before, but this time it was worse. I stood up from my chair to go to the bathroom, and everything started spinning. The next thing I remember is being on the floor with Sarah shouting my name and Carol calling for an ambulance. They took me to the emergency room of the same hospital where I worked, which was ironic. They ran tests, blood work, and EKG. The diagnosis was extreme exhaustion, low blood pressure, and a clear warning that my body could no longer handle the pace I was demanding of it. The doctor, a young man who looked about 12, told me sternly, "Mrs. Vance, at your age, you can't push yourself like this. You need to rest. If you continue like this, you're going to have a serious problem." I nodded, ashamed, like a child being scolded by a teacher. Natalie showed up at the hospital in a fury as soon as she found out. "Mom, this is over. You're quitting that job right now." We argued in the ER room in front of nurses who pretended not to listen. I insisted I was fine, that it was just a silly dizzy spell that I could keep working. She cut me off. "No, you can't. And it's not negotiable. You're going to quit that job and take care of yourself. Period." Arthur arrived shortly after, alerted by Megan, who had heard from Natalie. He didn't say anything, just sat next to me and took my hand. That was worse than any scolding. His worried silence told me more than 1,000 words. They discharged me that same night with instructions to rest for a week and then come back for a checkup. The next day, I called Patricia and told her I needed to reduce my hours further. She was understanding. "Eleanor, I don't want anything to happen to you. How about you work just one night a week? Thursdays, 4 hours instead of 6, from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. It's the least I can offer without officially letting you go." I accepted. It was humiliating to need my hours reduced, to feel like my body was betraying me, but I had no choice. From March on, I only worked on Thursdays from 6 to 10. The rest of the week, I stayed at home resting, watching TV, knitting the baby blanket, feeling useless. Carol visited me often. She brought me food, forced me to go for walks, even if it was just to the park, and told me hospital gossip to keep me feeling connected. "We miss you," she'd say. "The shift isn't the same without you." I knew she was just being kind, but it still comforted me to hear it. Arthur also came by more often, even though he no longer picked me up from the hospital since I only worked one night, and Natalie had insisted on driving me on those days. On Thursday nights, when I left the hospital, Natalie would be waiting for me in the parking lot with the car warmed up and soft music on the radio. We didn't talk much during the drive. She knew I was tired, but her presence was comforting. She would drop me off at home, make sure I ate something, even if it was light, and would only leave when I promised to go to bed immediately. April brought flowers and pleasant temperatures. Natalie's pregnancy was progressing well. She was 6 months along and had a huge belly. The kids were excited about their future sister. They had chosen the name together. It would be Lucy. I finished the baby blanket and started knitting tiny booties that seemed impossibly small. Did babies really have such small feet? Megan brought me a photo album from when Claire was a newborn so I could see that, yes, baby feet were really that tiny. We looked at the photos together, and Megan told me stories of those early months, of how hard it had been to be a single mother in Denver without family nearby, of the sleepless nights, the constant fears. But it was also magical, she added, that connection with your daughter, that feeling that you created a life. There's nothing like it. In May, Arthur proposed something that surprised me. "Eleanor, I've been thinking, why don't we travel together, you and I? A real trip, to somewhere you've always wanted to go." I laughed. "Arthur, I'm 65, I get tired from nothing. And besides, what will people say if we go on a trip together?" He shrugged. "Let them say what they want. I'm not proposing anything indecent, just a trip between friends. And it doesn't have to be far. We could go to Portugal. It's close, beautiful, quiet. Just a week." The idea tempted me. I had never traveled alone with a man who wasn't my husband. George and I had always gone to Lake Geneva, the same place every summer for 30 years. We were never adventurous, but why not? What was stopping me now? I mentioned the idea to Natalie, expecting her to say it was crazy. Instead, she surprised me. "Mom, I think it's perfect. You need a real rest to disconnect. And Arthur is good company. Go." I mentioned it to Carol, and she encouraged me too. "Eleanor, for God's sake, go, have fun, live a little." Even Megan said she thought it was a great idea, that her father needed a vacation and I would be the perfect companion. So I agreed. Arthur organized everything. He booked a small hotel in Lisbon, rented a car, planned the route. We would leave in early June, a week before Lucy was due. The trip to Lisbon was revealing in ways I hadn't anticipated. We left early on a Monday morning, Arthur driving his gray Toyota, which had enough miles on it to circle the globe. The flight was easy. We arrived in Lisbon in the afternoon. The hotel was small but charming, in the Alfama district, with a view of the Tagus River. Arthur had booked separate rooms on different floors, which I appreciated because it showed he respected my space and there were no weird expectations. We spent the week exploring Lisbon without any rush. We visited the port wine cellars, where we got slightly drunk, tasting different varieties. We wandered through the cobbled streets of the old town. We climbed the Clérigos Tower, though the stairs nearly killed me. We rode the tram across the Dom Luís Thar Bridge. We ate cod prepared in 1,000 different ways, custard tarts that made me close my eyes in pleasure, and drank strong coffee in old cafes where time seemed to have stopped. We talked about everything and nothing during those days. Arthur told me more about his life before he met me, about his father who had left him the shop, about his mother who died when he was 20, about his fears and regrets. I told him about my marriage to George, about how it had been good but not passionate, about how I felt guilty for not missing him more than I did. One night, while dining at a restaurant with a river view, Arthur asked me something he had been wanting to ask for a while. "Eleanor, do you ever regret how your life turned out? I mean, if you could go back, would you change anything?" I thought before answering. "I would change George dying so soon," I finally said. "I would have liked more time with him. But the rest, no. Because if I change anything, maybe I wouldn't be here with you now. Maybe I wouldn't have met your family. I wouldn't have discovered I can work and support myself. I wouldn't have learned I'm stronger than I thought. So no, I wouldn't change anything. And you?" He smiled. "I would change many things. I wouldn't have let debt destroy my marriage. I would have taken better care of my family. I would have been less proud. But I also wouldn't change anything for the same reason you wouldn't. Everything bad brought me here, to you, to this new life. And that's worth it." On our last night in Lisbon, as we were strolling through the Ribeira after dinner, Arthur took my hand. It was a simple, natural gesture with no romantic connotations, just two friends walking together. But it meant something. It meant trust, companionship, connection. I didn't say anything. I just left my hand in his as we walked in silence, and I realized something important. I didn't need romance at my age. I didn't need passion or drama. I needed exactly this: deep friendship, reliable companionship, someone who understood me without needing words. And that's what Arthur gave me. That's what we gave each other. We returned to Chicago on a Sunday afternoon. Natalie called me as soon as I got home. "Mom, how was the trip?" "Wonderful," I said. I needed that more than I thought. "I'm glad," she replied. "And Mom, I have news. I think Lucy is going to arrive earlier than expected. I've been having contractions all day. We're on our way to the hospital." My heart raced. "Do you need me to come?" "Not yet. It could be a false alarm. But stay ready. I'll call you as soon as I know something." I hung up and sat down to wait. Arthur, who had come in with me to help with my suitcase, stayed to keep me company. "I'm not leaving until we know something," he said. And the two of us stayed in my living room, drinking tea, waiting for news. The call came at 11 p.m. Lucy had been born. 7 pounds, 2 ounces. Healthy, perfect. Natalie was fine, tired, but happy. Jason was crying in the background of the call, emotional. I cried too, with relief and joy. "Can I come meet her tomorrow?" I asked. "Of course, Mom. Come in the morning." I hung up and hugged Arthur. I needed to share that happiness with someone. "I have another granddaughter," I told him. "I know," he replied, smiling. "Congratulations, Grandma." He left shortly after, and I stayed up late, too excited to sleep. A new granddaughter. Another life in this family that was growing and expanding in unexpected ways. I went to the hospital first thing in the morning. Natalie was in a private room, exhausted but radiant. Jason was dozing in an armchair next to her, and in a transparent bassinet was Lucy, wrapped in a pink hospital blanket, sleeping with her fists clenched. She was tiny, perfect, with that characteristic newborn baby smell that is like nothing else. I picked her up carefully, afraid of breaking her, and she opened her eyes for a second before falling back asleep. I felt a wave of love so intense it made me dizzy. Another granddaughter. Another reason to keep going, to take care of myself, to live. Natalie watched me with tired but happy eyes. "Isn't she beautiful, Mom?" "The most beautiful," I confirmed. The following months were a whirlwind of diapers, bottles, and sleepless nights. I helped as much as I could. I went to Natalie's house 3 times a week, looked after Lucy while Natalie slept or showered, picked up the older kids from school, prepared meals. I was tired, but it was a different kind of tired. One with purpose. Carol told me I looked better, more lively, and she was right. Taking care of Lucy gave me a reason to get up every day with renewed energy. At the hospital, my reduced schedule was still working well. One night a week was manageable. It didn't exhaust me like before. David had taken on more responsibilities and was doing well, with that balance of efficiency and humanity that is hard to achieve. Sarah had completely relaxed. She now joked with me about my status as a part-time supervisor. Lauren was still distant but correct, and Carol brought photos of her vacation with Ramon, beaches and sunsets, genuine smiles. "We're getting married," she announced one day. I was flabbergasted. "Seriously? Seriously?" she confirmed, laughing. "I know it sounds ridiculous to get married at our age, but we want to do it. A small, intimate ceremony. And I want you to be my witness." I was touched. "It would be an honor," I told her. Carol's wedding was in October, a civil ceremony at a courthouse, followed by a meal at a nice restaurant. We all attended, me as the witness. Ramon with his children and grandchildren, Arthur, Megan, and Claire. Carol was beautiful in a light blue dress and a bouquet of white flowers. Ramon looked at her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. During the ceremony, I cried, not from sadness, but from happiness for my friend who had found love again after so much pain. At the reception, we toasted the newlyweds. To love that has no age, to second chances. Carol hugged me afterward and whispered in my ear, "Thanks for encouraging me to live. Without you, I wouldn't have had the courage." "Of course you would have," I replied. "You just needed someone to remind you that you could." November arrived with its usual melancholy, but this year it affected me less. I had too many good things in my life to let myself be dragged down by seasonal sadness. Lucy was growing fast, already smiling and babbling incomprehensible things. Claire had started school and was very proud of her new uniform and backpack. Natalie's older grandsons were doing well in school, no problems. Natalie had gone back to work, but with reduced hours, which she was grateful for because it allowed her to be with Lucy more. Jason was a devoted father, the kind who changes diapers without complaining and gets up at dawn to give bottles. My family was functioning, and that filled me with satisfaction. In December, 4 years after George's funeral, I realized something important. I no longer defined my life in reference to him. For a long time, I had been Elena the widow, Elena who lost her husband. But now I was just Elena. Elena who worked at a hospital, Elena who had uncovered frauds, Elena who had an improbable but real family, Elena who traveled to Portugal with a friend, Elena who took care of her grandchildren. George was still part of my story, but he was no longer my whole story. And that was okay. I had learned that honoring the dead doesn't mean stopping your life. It means living on in a way they would approve of. The 4th Christmas without George was the happiest since his death. The house was full of people, noise, life. Lucy cried, demanding attention. Claire sang Christmas carols at the top of her lungs. The older kids argued about what to play. The adults tried to coordinate dinner while drinking wine and laughing at silly things. Carol and Ramon had joined our celebrations, as had some of Megan's friends. The house was bursting with people, and I couldn't have been happier. At one point during the night, while everyone was eating and chatting, I slipped out to the yard for some air. I needed a moment of silence, to process all that happiness that sometimes overwhelms more than sadness. Arthur found me there. "Are you okay?" "I'm perfect," I said. I just needed a breather. He sat next to me on the yard bench. It's been a good year, he commented. The best in a long time, I confirmed. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the laughter coming from inside the house. Eleanor, he said finally, I want you to know that these 4 years with you have been a gift. You gave me a second chance when I didn't deserve it. You helped me rebuild my life, get my family back. I don't know how to thank you. I shook my head. Arthur, you were the one who gave me a second chance. You protected me when I was in danger. You gave me company when I was lonely. You showed me that life doesn't end in your 60s. We're mutual saviors, I think. He smiled. Mutual saviors. I like that. We went back inside, where the happy chaos continued. Natalie called me over to hold Lucy because the baby wouldn't stop crying. I took her in my arms, and she calmed down immediately, as babies do when they're with someone who loves them unconditionally. I rocked her gently as I walked through the living room, humming a lullaby I used to sing to Natalie when she was little. Arthur watched me from the sofa with an expression I couldn't decipher. Then I realized it was pride. He was proud of me, of the woman I had become, of the life I had built on the ruins of the old one. The year ended with the usual ritual of grapes and toasts. This time, I only made one wish, for everything to stay just like this. I didn't ask for changes or improvements, just continuity. I had learned that happiness is not a destination, but a state you build day by day with small decisions and everyday gestures. And I had built a solid, imperfect, but real happiness. As I ate the grapes to the rhythm of the chimes, surrounded by all the people I loved and who loved me, I thought that George would be proud. Not that I had moved on without him, that would be cruel, but that I had found a way to live that made me happy. That's what he would have wanted for me, and I had finally achieved it. January of the 5th year without George brought cold and snow, a rare thing in Chicago. The kids were excited. They built snowmen in the yard that lasted exactly 1 day before melting. Lucy had turned 7 months old and was starting to crawl, which meant she needed constant supervision because she put everything in her mouth. I continued my 1-night-a-week shift at the hospital, continued helping Natalie with the kids, continued participating in Sunday dinners. The routine had become comfortable, predictable in a comforting way. But in February, something happened that broke that tranquility. Carol had a heart attack. It wasn't severe. The doctors acted quickly and saved her, but it was enough to scare all of us. I went to see her at the hospital as soon as I heard. She was in a cardiology bed, pale but conscious, with Ramon holding her hand as if he could keep her anchored to life by sheer willpower. Eleanor, she said in a weak voice, I thought I was dying. I thought I'd never see you again. I sat next to her and stroked her hair. But you didn't die. You're here, and you're going to recover. She nodded with tear-filled eyes. I'm scared, she confessed. I know, I said. I would be too. But you're strong, and you're not alone. Carol was hospitalized for a week. During that time, I visited her every day. I brought her flowers and magazines, stayed for hours chatting with her and Ramon. When she was discharged with instructions to change her diet and do moderate exercise, I offered to help her. Let's go for a walk together every morning, I proposed. Just half an hour, but every day. She gratefully accepted, and so we started a new routine. Every morning at 9, we would meet at the park and walk for half an hour, chatting or simply enjoying the silence. It was good for her and for me too. My knees protested, but the regular exercise gradually strengthened them. March brought flowers and pleasant temperatures. Lucy turned 9 months old and was a cheerful baby who smiled at everyone. Claire was learning to read and asked me to listen to her practice every time I saw her. I listened with infinite patience as she painstakingly sounded out each word. It reminded me of my teaching years, of that satisfaction of seeing a child learn something new. The older grandsons were preparing for their first communions, which meant expensive dresses and celebrations that Natalie couldn't afford on her own. I contributed financially without her asking. Mom, you don't have to, she protested. Of course I do, I replied. That's what grandmas are for. In April, Arthur gave me some surprising news. He had decided to stop working as a rideshare driver. "I don't need it anymore," he explained. "Between the pension they finally approved and some mechanic jobs I do from home, I have enough to live on. And I want to spend more time with Claire before she grows up too much." I understood his decision, but it made me sad. Those rides in his gray Toyota had been so important to me for so long that it was strange to think they wouldn't exist anymore. "But we'll still see each other, right?" I asked with a concern I couldn't hide. Arthur laughed. "Eleanor, at this point you're practically family. Of course we'll still see each other. In fact, you'll probably see me more than before because I'll have more free time." He was right. Sundays were still sacred, and we also started meeting for coffee some afternoons during the week. Just him and me, like two old friends enjoying each other's company without needing excuses. May brought Lucy's first birthday. Natalie organized a party in my yard with balloons and a teddy bear-shaped cake. All the kids from the neighborhood came, and it was a beautiful chaos. Lucy didn't understand what was happening, but seemed happy surrounded by people who loved her. When we blew out the candles for her, because at her age she didn't know how to blow yet, I felt a pang of emotion. A year ago, this child had been born, and I had been there from the beginning. I had seen her first smiles, her first teeth, her first crawls. And I would continue to be there for her first steps, her first words, all her first moments. That was a privilege I didn't take for granted. June was quiet. The heat was starting to build, but it wasn't unbearable yet. At the hospital, things were business as usual. David had confessed that he was thinking of marrying his girlfriend, the girl from the other hospital. He asked for my advice, and I told him the same thing I had told him years ago. If you love her, go for it. Life is too short to be afraid. A week later, he announced they were engaged. Sarah, Lauren, and I organized a small celebration in the office with cheap champagne and cookies. It was small, but meaningful. July and August passed in a blur of heat and summer routine. The kids were on vacation, which meant more chaos but also more joy. I spent many afternoons at the community pool with my grandsons, watching them from a lounge chair while they shouted and splashed. Lucy had learned to walk, wobbling like a little drunk, and it was the funniest thing in the world. Claire was now 6.5 and had become a talkative child who never stopped asking questions about everything. "Grandma Eleanor, why is the sky blue? Why can't fish live out of water? Why did the real grandma die?" That last question caught me off guard. We were in my yard. She was eating an ice cream cone that was melting down her hand. "What real grandma?" I asked, confused. "Grandpa Arthur's," she clarified. "My mom says she left because they were very poor, but I don't understand why being poor makes people leave." She was too young to understand such things, but too smart to ignore them. I sat down at her level and wiped her sticky hand with a napkin. "Sometimes adults have very big problems and they don't know how to solve them," I explained. "And when they don't know how to solve the problems, sometimes they leave because they think it's easier. But it's usually not because they don't love the people they leave behind, but because they are very sad and confused." Claire thought for a moment. "Like when I hide under the bed when Mom scolds me?" I laughed. "Something like that. But your mom always finds you and hugs you afterward, right?" She nodded. "Well, sometimes adults hide, and nobody finds them for a long time. But your grandpa found your mom again, and now you're all together." She seemed satisfied with the explanation and continued eating her ice cream. I was left thinking about how children ask questions that go straight to the heart of things, without detours or diplomacy. September brought the 5th anniversary of my first ride with Arthur. 5 years. I couldn't believe so much time had passed. This time, we did organize a celebration, not just the two of us, but the whole family. We rented a room at a restaurant and celebrated in style. Natalie prepared a video with photos from all these years. Photos of Sunday dinners, trips, birthdays, all the shared moments. We projected it on a screen while we ate, and there were widespread tears. Arthur stood up to make a toast. 5 years ago, a woman who needed a ride from the hospital got into my car. I didn't know that 12-minute trip would change my life forever. Eleanor taught me that kindness exists, that second chances are possible, that families can be built even if you don't share blood. So I toast to Eleanor, to all of you, to this weird but perfect family we've created together. We all toasted and applauded. Then Natalie stood up and also made a toast. I toast to my mother, who thought her life was over at 63, but in reality, it was just beginning. She taught me that it's never too late to reinvent yourself, to be brave, to build a new life. I love you, Mom. I stood up and hugged them both, unable to speak because of the lump in my throat. October was the month Carol gave me more worrying news. The doctors had found a lump in her breast. She had to have tests to determine if it was malignant. I was scared, but I tried to stay calm for her. Whatever it is, we'll get through it, I told her with more conviction than I felt. The test results took 2 weeks. 2 weeks of anguish where every phone call put us on alert. Finally, the results came. It was benign. A huge scare, but nothing serious. Carol cried with relief in my arms. I thought I was going to die, Eleanor. I thought I had just started with Ramon and it was all over. But it's not over, I reminded her. You're fine and you're going to stay fine for many years. Ramon organized a celebration dinner with his whole family and ours. There were almost 20 of us crowded into his house, eating and laughing and celebrating life, because that's what you do when you cheat death. You celebrate harder than ever. In November, something I didn't expect happened. The hospital organized a tribute for all staff who had been working there for more than 5 years. I had only been there for 5.5 years, but they included me on the list. Patricia gave a speech about dedication and commitment, about how some employees go above and beyond their duties. She mentioned me specifically, talked about the uncovered frauds, my attention to detail, my integrity. They gave me a commemorative plaque that said, "For 5 years of exemplary service." It was ridiculous. I had barely worked 5 years while others had been there for decades, but it touched me all the same. After the event, several colleagues approached me to congratulate me. Some were doctors I barely knew. Others were nurses from the day shift I had never seen. They all said they had heard of me, of the older lady who had cleaned up the hospital's corruption. I felt like a minor celebrity, and it was awkward but also gratifying. December arrived with its usual madness, but this year with an extra dose of excitement. David was getting married on the 28th. Carol and I were invited to the wedding, which was at a beautiful estate on the outskirts of Chicago. The bride was a sweet girl named Patricia, a pediatric nurse with a smile that lit up entire rooms. The ceremony was beautiful, full of white flowers and sincere promises. During the reception, David came to our table and thanked me for all the advice I had given him. "You helped me more than you know, Eleanor," he said, "not just with work, but with life. Thanks for treating me like an equal when you could have treated me like a child." I was moved. "David, you never needed to be treated in any special way. You were always mature and hardworking. You just needed someone to believe in you." We danced one dance, him and I, something slow that didn't require much physical effort. It was strange and beautiful at the same time, like a father dancing with his daughter at her wedding, even though neither of us was family to the other. The 5th Christmas without George was different from all the previous ones. This time there wasn't a hint of sadness. We decorated the house with the kids, put up the biggest tree we had ever had, filled the yard with lights. Natalie and I cooked for days preparing Christmas Eve dinner. Lucy at 1.5 was fascinated by the tree lights and spent hours staring at them, mesmerized. Claire helped with the cooking with that childlike seriousness kids have when they think they're doing something important. The older grandson set the table and decorated with napkins folded into complicated shapes they had learned online. Christmas Eve was perfect. There were more than 20 of us, between family and friends. Carol and Ramon had come from Valencia. They didn't want to miss the celebration. Arthur was radiant, fully recovered from his pacemaker scare. Claire, now 7, helped serve the food, feeling very important. Lucy, at 2.5, ran everywhere singing made-up Christmas carols. The older grandsons were in that difficult preteen age but were still affectionate with me. Natalie and Jason seemed more in love than ever after years of marriage and 3 kids. Megan had started dating someone, a teacher from Claire's school, and seemed happy. Everyone seemed happy, and I was at the center of all that chaos and joy. I was the happiest of all. After dinner, when the kids were playing and the adults were chatting over dessert, Arthur proposed a toast. "I want to toast to Eleanor," he began, "to the bravest woman I know. 6 years ago, she was widowed, and instead of giving up, she decided to work nights at a hospital. She got into a stranger's car, trusting a 5-star rating. She survived a real threat, uncovered frauds that saved hundreds of people, helped a failure like me rebuild his life, and created this improbable but perfect family that brings us together today. Eleanor, you are extraordinary, and we are lucky to have you. Everyone applauded and toasted. I was so emotional I couldn't speak. Natalie hugged me. It's true, Mom. You're amazing. I'm not amazing, I finally managed to say. I just did what I had to do to survive. That's what makes you amazing, Arthur replied. Don't you see? The year ended with the usual ritual of grapes and toasts. This time, as I ate the grapes, I didn't wish for anything. I didn't need to wish for anything because I already had it all. Good enough health, a family that loved me, true friends, a life with purpose. What more could I ask for? When the chimes ended and everyone was hugging, I stood for a moment alone in the yard, looking at the stars. I thought about George, about what my life would have been like if he hadn't died. I would probably be at home right now, watching TV, bored, waiting for another day to pass. I wouldn't have met Arthur. I wouldn't have worked at the hospital. I wouldn't have discovered my own strength. George's death had been horrible, painful, unfair, but it had also been, in a twisted way, a gift. It had forced me to truly live for the first time in my life, not just survive, but live. And for that, despite the pain, I was grateful. Arthur came out to the yard and stood next to me in silence. What are you thinking about? He finally asked. About how life surprises you, I replied. About how bad things can lead to good things. About how a 12-minute ride can change everything. He nodded. You know what my daughter told me the other day? He commented. She said you were the best thing that ever happened to me. That without you, she and I wouldn't be speaking, that Claire wouldn't know me, that our family wouldn't exist. I turned to look at him. That's not true, Arthur. You did all the hard work. I was just there. Eleanor, being there is everything, he replied in a firm voice. In a world where everyone is busy, distracted, focused on themselves, you were there. You saw me when I was invisible. You listened to me when no one else would. You offered me coffee when you had little to give. That saved me. And then I saved you from Ray. But it started with you. It always started with you. We stood in silence for a while longer, two old friends who had traveled an improbable path together. From inside the house came the laughter of our family, the music, the life. You know what the best part of all this is? I asked him. What? He replied. That it's not over. This is just another chapter. There are many more to come. More Sunday dinners, more birthdays, more trips, more conversations, more life. Arthur smiled. More life? He repeated. I like that. We went back inside, where warmth, noise, and family awaited us. And as Lucy ran towards me with open arms, shouting, Nana, Nana! I thought that this was happiness. Not the perfect happiness of fairy tales, but real, messy, imperfect, yet authentic happiness. The happiness you build day by day with small gestures and brave decisions. The happiness I found in the seat of a gray Toyota one November night 6 years ago, when I still didn't know that my life had just begun. January arrived with that dry cold that characterizes a Chicago winter. The kind of cold that stings your face and makes you walk faster than usual just to get somewhere warm as soon as possible. I had started the year with a strange sense of absolute freedom. For the first time in 6 years, I didn't have to worry about shifts, schedules, or being on time for the hospital. My life was completely my own. I could wake up whenever I wanted, go to bed late without thinking about the next day's work, spend the whole day in my pajamas if I felt like it. At first, that freedom was a bit overwhelming. After decades of strict routines, first as a teacher and then as a hospital employee, not knowing what to do with my days was disorienting. But slowly, I found my own rhythm. I would get up around 8 a.m., have a leisurely breakfast while reading the newspaper that still arrived at my door every day. Then I would go for an hour-long walk in the neighborhood, enjoying the fresh air and the exercise that my knees appreciated when I didn't overdo it. I'd come home, shower, and spend a couple of hours reading or doing some housework. In the afternoons, I'd have visitors or visit someone. Natalie would come with Lucy at least twice a week, and I immensely enjoyed spending those afternoons with my youngest grandchild. Claire would come after school some days, and we would do her homework together, with me helping her with the math that she struggled with. The older grandsons appeared from time to time, less frequently now that they were at an age where friends are more important than family, but when they did come, they were still affectionate with me. And Arthur showed up almost every day for coffee in the afternoon. He had become a constant as reliable as the sunrise. One afternoon in mid-January, as Arthur and I were having coffee in my kitchen, he told me that Megan was thinking of marrying her boyfriend, the teacher from Claire's school. His name was Albert, and they had been dating for almost a year. "And what do you think?" I asked. Arthur shrugged. "I think it's fine. Albert is a good guy, treats my daughter and granddaughter well, has a stable job. I can't ask for more." But I noticed something in his tone, a hidden concern. "What's really wrong?" I insisted. He sighed. "I'm afraid of losing them again. I already lost them once when my life fell apart. Now that I have them back, the idea of Megan starting a new family and me being left on the sidelines terrifies me." I took his hand across the table. "Arthur, you're not going to be left on the sidelines. Albert isn't going to replace you. He's going to join. Families grow. They don't get replaced. Megan loves you. Claire adores you. That's not going to change because there's a new man in her life." He nodded, but I saw the worry was still there, lurking. I recognized that anxiety because I had felt it myself when Natalie married Jason years ago. That irrational fear of no longer being needed by your daughter. February brought news that made us all happy. David and Patricia were going to be parents. David called me specifically to tell me, which touched me because it showed that the bond we had formed during those years working together was real. "Eleanor, I'm going to be a father. I don't know if I'm ready, but I'm excited." I laughed. "No one is ever ready to be a father, David, but you'll do great. You have a good heart, and that's the most important thing." He invited me to the celebration they were having at their house the following weekend. I went with Arthur because we had become an inseparable package at social events. David's house was full of young people in their 20s and 30s, with their whole lives ahead of them. Arthur and I were easily the oldest ones there. But we didn't feel out of place. David introduced us as my mentors from the hospital, and several of his friends came to talk to us, curious to meet the people David mentioned so often. It was strange and flattering to be treated as someone important by people who could be my grandchildren. In March, Carol called me from Valencia with worrying news. Ramon had had a minor stroke. It wasn't severe. The doctors had acted quickly, and the after effects were minimal, but it had been a huge scare. "Eleanor, I thought I was losing him," she told me, crying over the phone. "We just started our life together, and I already thought it was ending." I tried to console her as best I could from a distance. "But it didn't end, Carol. Ramon is okay, and he's going to stay okay." I promised I would visit her soon. I spoke with Arthur and suggested we take a trip to Valencia to see Carol and Ramon. He agreed immediately. "Whenever you want. You know I'll follow you anywhere." We organized the trip for the end of March, a long weekend. Valencia greeted us with sun and pleasant temperatures. Carol had prepared the guest room in her apartment for us, a bright place near the center with a view of a park. Ramon was almost fully recovered. He only slurred his words a bit when he was tired, but otherwise he seemed the same. We spent 3 wonderful days with them. We visited the City of Arts and Sciences, walked through the historic center, ate authentic paella in the Albufera. But more than the tourism, what I enjoyed was spending time with Carol, chatting like we used to, reconnecting in a way that the distance had slightly diluted. One afternoon, while the men were watching football on TV, Carol and I went out for coffee alone. "I miss you," she said. "Life here is good, but I miss you. Our morning walks, our talks, just knowing you were nearby." "I miss you too," I admitted. "But I'm glad you're happy here. That's what's important." When we got back to Chicago, Natalie was waiting for us at the airport with news that left me speechless. She was pregnant again. At 40. "Mom, I know it's crazy. We didn't plan it, but it's happening. And we're happy. Scared, but happy." I hugged her tightly, processing the information. Another grandchild. Number 4. At my age, I would have 4 grandchildren, and I would most likely live long enough to see them grow up, graduate, maybe even get married. It was overwhelming and beautiful at the same time. "I'm happy for you, honey," I said sincerely, "and I'll be there to help you, as always." Jason was radiant. He looked proud and nervous in equal parts. The kids didn't know the news yet. They would wait until the pregnancy was further along to tell them. Lucy would remain the youngest for a few more months before being dethroned. That night, back at home, I sat in my living room thinking about how my family just kept growing. I had gone from being a lonely widow to the matriarch of an expanding clan. It was a role I had never sought, but it fit me surprisingly well. April was the month Megan gave us the date for her wedding. They would marry in July, a small ceremony in a botanical garden, followed by a meal at a restaurant. Arthur got nervous immediately. "I have to give a speech, right? Fathers always give speeches." "Probably," I said. "And what am I going to say? I'm not good with words." "You'll say what you feel," I advised. Megan doesn't expect a perfect speech, she expects something sincere. We spent several afternoons preparing the speech together. Arthur would write sentences and I would edit them, removing redundancy, adding emotion where needed. In the end, we got something beautiful, a 5-minute speech about a father's pride, mutual forgiveness, and second chances. When he read it aloud in my kitchen, practicing, his voice broke several times. "Perfect," I told him. "It's perfect, just like that." May arrived with premature heat. Temperatures rose to almost 90 degrees and Chicago turned into an oven. I spent the hottest hours of the day inside my house with the air conditioning on, reading or watching shows on TV. I had discovered streaming platforms thanks to my grandchildren and had gotten hooked on several series. I especially liked historical dramas, those British productions with elaborate costumes and intelligent dialogue. Natalie laughed at my new hobby. "Mom, you've become a binge watcher like any millennial." And maybe she was right. But what was wrong with that? It was entertainment, culture, a harmless way to pass the time. One afternoon in late May, I received an unexpected call. It was Detective Miller, the police officer who had handled the Ray Collins case years ago. I hadn't heard from her since the trial. "Mrs. Vance, I'm calling to inform you of something. Ray Collins has been released from prison. He served his sentence and is free." My stomach clenched. I had tried not to think about Ray over the years. I had tried to convince myself that chapter was closed. But now he was out. "Should I be worried?" I asked, my voice trying to sound calm. "I don't think so," the detective replied. "He served his full sentence, completed a rehabilitation program, and signed a restraining order against you. Legally, he can't come within 500 yards. But I wanted you to know just in case. And if you notice anything strange, anything at all, call me immediately." I thanked her and hung up. I sat on the sofa for a long time, processing the news. Ray was free. The man who had wanted to harm me, who had planned to break into my house, was walking the same streets as me. I told Arthur that same afternoon. He immediately became serious. "Do you want me to stay over at your house for a few days, just as a precaution?" The offer touched me, but I refused. "No, Arthur. I'm not going to live in fear. Ray served his sentence. He spent years in prison paying for what he did. He has no reason to come after me now." "Still," he insisted, "promise me you'll lock all your doors and windows properly. That you'll always have your phone nearby, that you'll call me if you notice anything strange." I promised him, and for the next few weeks I was more alert than usual. I looked over my shoulder when I walked down the street. I double-checked that the doors were locked at night. I jumped at any unexpected noise. But nothing happened. Ray didn't appear. There were no incidents. Slowly, the fear diluted into a background concern that I learned to ignore. June brought intense preparations for Megan's wedding. She was stressed organizing everything, and I offered to help in any way I could. I ended up being a sort of unofficial coordinator, helping with the invitations, overseeing the floral arrangements, making sure the restaurant had everything it needed. Claire was going to be the flower girl and was thrilled with her new dress, a pale pink dress that made her feel like a princess. I made sure it was altered perfectly for her. Arthur, for his part, was as nervous as a schoolboy before an exam. He practiced his speech every day, changing words, adding phrases, removing others. Arthur, that's enough. I finally told him. The speech is perfect. Stop touching it, or you'll ruin it. He reluctantly agreed. The wedding day arrived with clear skies and perfect weather. The ceremony was at 6 p.m. at the Chicago Botanic Garden, a beautiful place full of exotic plants and shaded paths. I arrived early to help with the final preparations. Megan was in a separate room getting dressed, surrounded by her friends who were doing her hair and makeup. When I saw her in her wedding dress, I got emotional. It was a simple but elegant dress of white lace that suited her perfectly. "You look beautiful," I told her sincerely. She turned and hugged me. "Thank you for everything, Eleanor. For helping with all this, for taking care of my dad, for being part of our family. I don't know what we would have done without you." I hugged her back, unable to speak due to the lump in my throat. The ceremony was intimate and beautiful. Only 50 guests, all seated on white chairs under the trees. Claire walked down the aisle, scattering petals with a professional seriousness that made everyone laugh. Then Megan entered on Arthur's arm. He walked tall, proud, with tears streaming down his cheeks unashamedly. When he gave his daughter to Albert at the altar, the two men shared a long hug that wasn't planned, but was the most emotional moment of the ceremony. The officiant spoke about love, family, and second chances. Megan and Albert exchanged vows they had written themselves, sincere promises about supporting each other, raising Claire together, and building a shared life. When they were declared husband and wife, we all applauded and cried. I looked around and saw familiar faces: Natalie with Jason and the kids, Carol and Ramon who had come from Valencia, David and Patricia with her now noticeable baby bump, Sarah and her boyfriend, even Lauren had come. All these people connected in one way or another through me, gathered to celebrate love. The reception was at a restaurant with a terrace and garden. The food was excellent, the wine flowed freely, and the atmosphere was one of pure joy. When it was time for the speeches, Arthur stood up, his hands trembling slightly. He took a crumpled piece of paper out of his pocket, looked at it for a second, and then put it away. He was going to improvise. "Megan," he began in an emotional voice, "when you were born 32 years ago, your mother and I looked at you and thought you were perfect. And you were. But life is complicated, and I made mistakes, many mistakes. I let debt and failure consume me. I let my marriage fall apart. And worst of all, I let you drift away because it was easier to be alone in my misery than to face my failure as a father." His voice broke. Megan was crying in her chair, Albert holding her hand. "But 7 years ago, I met someone who reminded me that it's never too late to change, that second chances exist if you have the courage to ask for them. That person saved me in multiple ways, and thanks to her, I found the courage to win you back. And you, my daughter, had the generosity to forgive me, to let me back into your life, to let me know Claire. And now you're here, marrying a good man, starting a new chapter, and I'm here to see it. I don't deserve it, but I am infinitely grateful." He raised his glass. "I toast to you and Albert, to a life full of love, patience, understanding, to a better life than your mother and I had. I love you." We all toasted and applauded. There wasn't a dry eye on that terrace. After the speeches came the dancing. The first dance was for the newlyweds. Then Megan danced with Arthur, a slow song that he could barely manage because he was crying too much. Claire danced with Albert, and it was adorable to see them together, the little girl stepping on the groom's feet while he patiently guided her. Then the dance floor opened up, and we all danced. I danced with Arthur, with Jason, with David, even with Ramon, who moved carefully after his stroke but didn't want to miss the fun. At 11 p.m., while the party was still in full swing, I slipped out to the garden for some air. I was exhausted but happy, the kind of satisfying exhaustion that comes after a perfect day. Natalie found me there. She sat next to me on a bench with her 4-month belly now visible. "It was beautiful, wasn't it?" she commented. "Gorgeous," I confirmed. Megan looked so happy. Arthur, too. "Mom, can I ask you something?" Natalie said after a moment. "Of course. Do you ever regret how your marriage with Dad was? I mean, seeing these modern weddings with so much explicit love, do you regret that yours was quieter?" The question surprised me. I thought before answering. "No," I finally said. Your father and I had a good marriage. It wasn't passionate like in the movies, but it was solid, stable, full of mutual respect. That has value. And it gave me you, which is the best thing I've ever done in my life. So no, I don't regret it. Natalie rested her head on my shoulder. Thanks, Mom. For everything. For being my rock. For helping me with the kids. For building this weird extended family we have. You're amazing. I'm not amazing, I protested. I just did what I had to do. That's exactly what makes you amazing, she replied. And we sat like that for a while, mother and daughter, enjoying the shared silence while laughter and music drifted from the terrace. July was hot and intense. Natalie entered her second trimester, and this time she was having a harder time than with Lucy. Constant nausea, extreme fatigue, mood swings. I spent more time at her house, helping with the kids, cooking, cleaning, doing whatever I could to lighten her load. Jason did what he could, but he worked long hours and came home exhausted. The older kids were at that difficult age where everything seemed unfair and they complained constantly. And Lucy, at almost 3, was in the full throes of toddler tantrums over everything. The days were exhausting but necessary. One afternoon, while Natalie was resting in her room and I was watching the kids in the living room, Lucy came up and hugged my legs. "Nana, I love you so, so, so much," she told me. Those moments made all the exhaustion worthwhile. August was the month something finally happened with Ray Collins, though not what I had feared. I received a letter from him. It arrived in my mailbox in a plain white envelope with no return address. I almost threw it away, thinking it was junk mail. But something made me open it. Inside was a handwritten letter in shaky script. It said, "Mrs. Vance, I know I have no right to write to you. I know what I did was unforgivable. I spent 6 years in prison thinking about it, regretting it, trying to understand how I got to that point. I have no excuses. I was desperate, in debt, scared, and I made horrible decisions that put your life in danger. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that I am deeply sorry and that you can rest assured. I will never come near you again. I have rebuilt my life. I work in a warehouse. I go to therapy. I try to be a better person. I wish I could erase what I did, but I can't. I can only try not to be that person ever again. I wish you the best. Ray." I read the letter 3 times. I felt a confusing mix of emotions: anger for what he had put me through, pity for the broken man I perceived in those words, relief to know he had no intention of bothering me. I showed the letter to Arthur that same afternoon. He read it with a frown. "Are you going to respond?" he asked. "I don't know," I admitted. Part of me wants to ignore it, to move on as if it doesn't exist. But another part feels I should respond, if only to close the circle completely. Arthur nodded. "Do whatever makes you feel better. There's no right answer." I thought about it for several days. Finally, I decided to write a brief response. "Ray, I received your letter. I accept your apology. Not because you deserve it, but because holding a grudge would hurt me more than it would you. I wish you luck in your rehabilitation. Eleanor Vance." I sent the letter and never heard from him again, but I felt that something had been definitively closed. September brought the return to the school routine. The older grandsons went back to school. Claire started 2nd grade. Lucy started a new daycare because Natalie needed more hours of care with her advanced pregnancy. I continued to help as much as I could, but I also tried to take care of myself, not to overwork myself as I had in the past. I had learned that I couldn't be everyone's savior, that I also needed time for myself. So I set boundaries. I would help Natalie 3 days a week, no more. The other days would be for me, to read, to walk, to see Arthur, to just be. October was when Arthur proposed something completely unexpected. We were having coffee in my kitchen, as we did almost every day, when he suddenly said, "Eleanor, I've been thinking about something. What would you think if we lived together?" I was left with my cup halfway to my lips. "Excuse me?" "Live together?" he repeated. "I don't mean anything romantic. We're too old for that nonsense. I mean sharing a house. We both live alone. We both have houses that are too big for one person. We could sell one of the two houses or rent it out, live together, share expenses, keep each other company. We'd be like siblings, each with our own space but sharing the common areas. The idea left me speechless. Arthur, I don't know what to say. You don't have to decide now, he said quickly. Just think about it. There's no rush. I thought about the proposal for weeks. I asked Natalie what she thought. She was surprised but not opposed. Mom, if it makes you happy, go for it. Arthur is a good person and you take care of each other. I don't see anything wrong with it. I asked Carol over the phone. She laughed. Eleanor, you've been inseparable for years. Living together is just the next logical step. Do it. I asked Megan because it affected her too. Megan told me she would love for her father to have constant company, that she worried about him living alone now that she had moved in with Albert. All the opinions were positive. The only obstacle was myself, my fear of change, my attachment to my independence. But finally I decided yes. Why not? I was 67. Arthur was 60. We were both alone. We both loved each other in a deep, though not romantic way. Sharing a house made practical and emotional sense. In November, we started planning the move. We decided that Arthur would sell his small apartment and move into my house, which was larger and had a yard. We would renovate the second floor to give him his own space, a large bedroom with a private bathroom and a small living room. The ground floor would remain shared territory: kitchen, dining room, main living room, my bedroom. Hiring contractors, getting permits, planning the layout of the space. It took time, but we enjoyed the process, feeling like children planning a treehouse. Natalie helped us with the practical aspects, Megan with the decoration. It was a family project that excited us all. December arrived with its usual Christmas, but this year with the added excitement of Natalie's pregnancy, which was about to end. She was huge, uncomfortable, constantly in a bad mood. The baby would be born in January, probably early in the month. Christmas Eve was quieter than other years, with Natalie lying on the sofa, unable to move much, but it was still special. Lucy sang carols, Claire helped serve dinner. The older grandson set the table without complaining. Arthur was radiant, talking about the move that would begin in January, about what it would be like to live together. It's going to be an adventure, he'd say. Two old people living like roommates. What could go wrong? We all laughed. The truth is, we didn't know what could go wrong, but we were willing to find out. The 7th Christmas without George was the strangest of all because, for the first time, I realized I had barely thought about him all year. His absence was no longer the center of my life. It had become a blurry, important, but distant memory. I felt guilty for a moment, as if I were betraying his memory. But then I remembered something he had told me years ago when he was still alive. We were watching a movie about a widow, and George commented, "If I die first, I want you to rebuild your life, to be happy. Don't get stuck in the past." At the time, I had laughed and told him not to be dramatic, but now, 7 years later, I understood what he had meant. I had rebuilt my life. I was happy. I wasn't stuck in the past, and that was exactly what he would have wanted. The year ended with the usual ritual: grapes, toasts, hugs. This time, I made a specific wish: for the next year to be as good as this one, for Natalie to have a safe delivery, for her new baby to be healthy, for the move with Arthur to work out, for my family to continue to grow and prosper. As I ate the grapes to the rhythm of the chimes, I looked around my living room full of people I loved. Natalie with her huge belly, Jason taking care of her tenderly, the older grandsons joking with each other, Lucy asleep on the sofa, Claire helping to serve champagne to the adults, Megan and Albert kissing when the clock struck 12, Carol and Ramon, who had come from Valencia, David and Patricia with their newborn baby sleeping oblivious to the noise, and Arthur, my adventure partner, my savior, and my saved, looking at me from across the room with a smile that said more than 1,000 words. When the clock struck the final chime and everyone was hugging, Arthur came over and hugged me tightly. "Happy New Year, Eleanor," he said. "Thank you for everything, for these 7 incredible years, for agreeing to live with me, for being my family." "Happy New Year, Arthur," I replied. "Thank you for saving me when I needed it most, for staying, for being exactly who you are." We stayed in that hug a moment longer than socially acceptable. Two old people who had found in each other something precious and indefinable. It wasn't romance, it wasn't simple friendship. It was something deeper, more lasting. It was chosen family. It was home. And as the celebrations continued around us, I thought about the entire journey from that November night 7 years ago. The Eleanor who got into that gray Toyota for the first time was scared, alone, convinced her life was over. The Eleanor who was here now was strong, surrounded by love, convinced her life was just beginning. She had lost a husband but had gained an extended family. She had faced danger and survived. She had uncovered frauds and protected vulnerable people. She had worked when she thought she was too old. She had traveled to places she never imagined visiting. She had learned that it's never too late to reinvent yourself, to be brave, to build a new life on the ashes of the old. And now, about to turn 68, she was about to start another adventure, living with Arthur, sharing a house, creating a new home. I didn't know how it would turn out. There would probably be friction, disagreements about how to organize the kitchen or what show to watch on TV. We would probably annoy each other sometimes. But there would also be constant companionship, shared laughter, the peace of mind of knowing someone was there. And that was worth any inconvenience. The party continued until 3 a.m. When everyone finally left and I was alone in my house, I didn't feel the usual loneliness. I felt satisfaction, gratitude, peace. I sat on my sofa with a cup of tea, looking at the lights of the Christmas tree that were still shining. In 2 weeks, the renovations would begin. In a month, Arthur would move in. In 2 months, my 4th grandchild would be born. Life kept moving forward, carrying me with it. And I let myself be carried, happily. Because I had learned the most important lesson of all, that life doesn't end when you think it ends. It just changes shape. And if you have the courage to embrace those changes instead of resisting them, you can find happiness where you least expect it. In the seat of a gray Toyota, in 12-minute conversations that turn into a lifelong friendship, in families you build from the scraps of broken lives, in small gestures of kindness that end up saving the world, in a cup of hot chocolate offered to a stranger on a cold night, in the decision to get up every morning and keep trying even when all seems lost. That is true heroism, not the grand, spectacular acts, but the small, everyday gestures of resistance, of kindness, of hope. And I, Eleanor Vance, retired teacher, widow, hospital worker, fraud uncoverer, grandmother of 4, roommate of a rideshare driver, had learned that in the hardest and most beautiful way possible, and I wouldn't change it for anything in the world.